the laziest Kryptonian in the Marvel Universe. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination, so don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like, and if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 326 Homemade Photography Equipment. If Stark Films failed, at best, this technology would be thrown into the gutter. If it succeeded, it would be considered as accelerating the development of filmmaking technology and getting a piece of the pie. Henry's contract with Tony Stark clearly stated that he would receive half of the patents and profits generated by the technology developed under his leadership. While not all legal issues and promotion would require the Stark Films brands and presence, so half the profits were not unacceptable. After all, this was like picking up something for free for Henry. His original life plan had not included such an arrangement. Even if Henry wanted to set up his own company and monopolize all this, he would still have to pay the legal and promotional costs, even more than the half he was offering today. Otherwise, how could he accept such a huge fortune surrounded by wolves and tigers? He couldn't just rely on Krypton's iron fist to beat them all down one by one. And if he really had to resort to force, he would just go for it. Why bother with patents, technology, or trading? Besides, in the film industry, a major event happened in 1995. Steve Jobs, who acquired Lucasfilm's computer animation division in 1986, founded Pixar Animation Studios, which would release the computer-animated film Toy Story in 1995. This project, a collaboration between Pixar and the entertainment giant Disney, began in 1990. While Jobs' original intention was to promote his image processing computers, he was actually looking to sell hardware. He was seeking to avenge his previous defeat by competing with Apple, which he had founded but then driven out of the company. However, things often turn out to be unexpected, and the profits from an animated film would take forever to sell hardware alone. This forced Pixar to pivot and deviate from its core business by focusing on animation. Now you can understand why Jobs later sold Pixar and desperately tried to return to Apple. He couldn't compete with a Disney team in animation. Hardware was his forte. In short, this marked the irreversible trend of computers entering the film industry. Moreover, after 5 years of development, Pixar Animation Studios had likely mastered a number of computer-generated film technologies. Fortunately, they were working on computer-animated films and hadn't yet truly ventured into digital filmmaking. But Henry, who had suddenly decided to enter this field, was acutely aware of the impatience of time was of the essence, so, upon hearing the equipment director's remarks, which all but explicitly called for Tony Stark's help, Henry simply smirked. "You don't think Mr. Tony Stark brought me in just to collect a salary and do nothing, do you? I've already made some progress on the requirements for upgrading the camera equipment. I need everyone to pool their wisdom and make things even better. The relevant equipment is in my car. When I visited the company earlier, I saw an unused studio. Those of you in the equipment department can go over there and wait, and I'll have a few engineers come along to observe. I'll take a few people back to my car to unload the equipment. Other department heads, proceed according to the decisions made in today's meeting. The relevant details are in the pre-order documents we've returned to you. If anyone is free and interested, please come and observe the studio as well." Henry also spoke with decisiveness. After giving the order, he dismissed the administrative staff waiting outside the conference room, leaving only one or two to clean up the room. A group pulled a trailer to the parking lot and unloaded the homemade filming equipment, including the projector, from Henry's Cadillac for Charlize Theron's acting training. However, he omitted the handmade computer for the post-production equipment. Instead, he installed the software on a Stark i486 computer he'd purchased over 4 years earlier and brought it to the office as well. By the time the group had brought the equipment to the designated studio, nearly all the executives who had been in the conference room had arrived. There were even a few more. Today was a show of force, so Henry certainly wouldn't deliberately send anyone back to their posts. Even if he didn't need their flattery, he needed more people to spread the word about the new equipment. Several balding engineers, their eyes aglow, gathered around Henry's homemade equipment. With many parts uncovered and the connecting wires exposed, it looked like an unfinished object. Yet, it was this mechanical feel that captured the engineer's attention. They all habitually tried to understand the equipment before them, ticking off the parts and brands they could identify, like a treasure trove. After a brief inventory, they were shocked to discover that they had no idea what most of the parts on this homemade camera were for. Henry, however, didn't rush to explain. Instead, he set up the camera himself and connected the projector to the computer he had brought in. After all, a company isn't like home, so finding a white wall for a projection background isn't easy. Fortunately, Stark Pictures, a company specializing in film equipment, could temporarily borrow a projection screen from the warehouse, making it a breeze. By the time the screen was set up, Henry had finished assembling the equipment. He hadn't asked anyone else to help because it was better to do it himself than to teach them. There would be plenty of opportunities for future research. Now everyone was eager to see the results. When the equipment was ready, Henry clapped his hands, attracting everyone's attention. "Gentlemen, this is the digital filming equipment I developed at home. The footage will be stored on the high-capacity hard drives used by regular computers, not on film or tape. Not only can we play the video instantly, but we can also import it into a computer for post-production. Now, let's have a colleague stand in front of the camera. We'll shoot a short clip and then play it back for everyone to see. Anyone want to be a model? The dream of performing in front of a camera is something everyone, at least those working at a film company, have dreamed of." While the number of people raising their hands wasn't overwhelming, at least Henry didn't have to point a reluctant person in the face. One lucky guy stood in front of the camera. He looked around, unsure of what to do. He shyly asked, "What should I do?" Henry, operating the camera, observed this, asking, "Have you seen the movie Forrest Gump?" "Yes, sir." "Then do a line from Life is Like Chocolates. Feel free to improvise." The person in front of the camera immediately feigned a self-righteous air, which in reality looked like a fool to the others, and improvised, "Mom always said life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get." Surprisingly, this guy even made a shameless joke. Not only did the men present smile knowingly, but the women were equally amused. This was because the internet wasn't very developed back then, and video uploads weren't supported. Otherwise, if this idiot's dirty jokes were posted online, it would have been a surefire way to end his social life. Chapter 327: The Prospects of Digital Photography Technology. Henry recorded the clip for about a minute before stopping. It was just for everyone to see, not to steal traffic. Besides, while the camera's hard drive had a specially designed, large-capacity hard drive, the one in the Stark i486 computer didn't. If the recorded video was too long, the original file would be too large to be transferred to the i486 computer, let alone post-production. After filming, Henry first projected the performance clip of the volunteer onto the projector. There was no film development or other complicated post-production processes involved. Simply input a few lines of text on a computer menu, and the video clip stored in the camera was projected onto the screen. The video, of course, included sound. The volunteer's reaction to the result of his performance was more than just shock. He grabbed Henry's collar as if the sky had fallen, and kept saying, "Burn the film, burn the film." His attitude was the same as Charlize Theron's first time nonchalantly appearing on camera, completely unaware of the serious consequences. But she was his girlfriend, and it was only natural that he didn't want her dark history to be exposed. What kind of fat guy was this show-off? He was showing off and he wouldn't allow others to see it? Henry pushed away the ugly face that was about to cry, ignoring the sneers beside him. "My camera doesn't use film, how can I burn it just like that? Now I have to show you the editing function. Boy, get out of the way." "No, boss. If you don't burn the film today, or find a way to get rid of that video, I'm going to jump off the roof." Henry, who was getting impatient with the pestering, could only say, "Okay, okay. Let me demonstrate the editing effect first, and after everyone has seen it, I'll delete the video file. Otherwise, I'll have to reshoot it. Do you think I'm a serious director? If the effect is not good, we will reshoot it, and then shoot hundreds or even thousands of times for a simple scene. If you don't get out of the way now, your film will be entered into the Stark Films History Museum and preserved forever." As expected, when people are in a hurry, it is useless to reason with them. Henry's threat made the fat man take 3 steps back and make room. Henry came to the computer and started operating it, explaining, "I use a computer from 4 years ago, the Stark i486 series. I installed the Linux system and used editing software. I don't do anything too complicated, Just cut the film in the middle and then swap it front and back. Since he had been using it himself before, Henry had never thought about making a user-friendly interface. Besides, designing a UI would take up resources. A new computer would be easy, but this old computer from 4 years ago would take up a lot of messy resources, and the editing software couldn't run. Even so, this simple swapping job took more than 10 minutes to complete. During this time, the previous video clips were played repeatedly. The focus of everyone's discussion shifted from the original colleague's unsightly performance to the picture quality, color, details and other performances. Someone then went to move a set of movie playback equipment, and actually took a set of movie films to play, and projected it on the second screen. With a real movie for comparison, everyone had a more intuitive understanding of the color details. When the editing was finished, everyone switched to watching the video with the clips swapped before and after. The picture quality, color, etc. of the obviously incoherent video did not change much compared to the original clip, just like the work of film editing. It's just that the picture quality is still a little worse than the movie. The one who made the criticism was a photographer from the production department. He dealt with the cameras the most on a daily basis, so he was also called in to observe. Henry replied, "Yes, it is a little worse than the traditional 35mm film. But the image quality has already exceeded the level of television cameras." This time the photographer nodded. "Well, that's right, everyone was a technical person, and they spoke their mind, seeking truth from facts, and did not exaggerate or criticize anything." Soon, people's interest shifted from the film to the homemade equipment that Henry brought. Although most people had an excited expression, a few people looked worried. However, Henry did not listen to everyone's opinions first, but finished his own thoughts first. "I will get the relevant technical documents later. In addition to letting the engineers in the equipment department refer to them, I also need to ask my colleagues in the legal department to help me apply for a patent. Regarding the division of relevant patent rights, the legal department should have my personnel contract, so it will be handled according to the agreement between Mr. Stark and me. What I hope everyone will do is put this patchwork-like thing together. Movie cameras aren't always mounted on a tripod, sometimes they're carried on the shoulder, following the characters around. Therefore, there shouldn't be any exposed wires. Lightweight design is essential. Regarding film quality, I already have a codec solution that can improve image quality to 4K. The specific implementation will be completed within Stark Films, but I also need help to improve the overall system architecture. Also, the system's operation and interface need to be redesigned to make it easier to use and lower the barrier to entry. This is the work I'll be leading everyone on in the near future. If you have any questions, please raise them now." While some were praising him, those who looked worried questioned, "Mr. Brown, this system you've developed is practically going to upend the current film-based film production and broadcasting market. Have you considered how much this would cost? Is there anyone willing to cooperate?" IMAX's less than successful experience demonstrates that the 35mm film system's position is not easily challenged, but it's not as difficult as you might imagine, Henry concluded decisively, adding, "We just need to develop a method to transfer computer formats to film, so it can be used with traditional projection systems. Using digital storage means directors don't have to worry about film prices and the inability to reuse them. As for post-production, we can not only sell software but also rent out post-production studios. That means for the 3 parts of recording, conversion, and projection, for the first 2, they can choose the appropriate equipment for any given film. Many film crews already rent equipment, so there's no cost associated with replacing equipment. As for projection, we can provide traditional film copies. If a cinema is willing to upgrade its projection equipment, think about it." Henry patted his projector mechanism. Without the specialized motors and bulbs required for film projectors, including patent licensing fees, what price could we charge for the new projector, and what would be the profit margin, in order for each frame of the film that is quickly passing under the drive of the motor to be projected clearly, but without reflecting the replacement status of the film when it is rolled? The light of the projector actually flashes at a certain frequency. In order for the two to work perfectly together, the motor and bulb used in the projector naturally have their own unique features. This means that there are various patented technologies and fees entangled, so anyone who makes this kind of equipment must pay for a license. However, although digital film playback also has the concept of frames, it does not require flashing lights to illuminate the film. The patent licensing fees saved here are undoubtedly the niche. So Henry's explanation silenced the heads of the equipment departments. Chapter 328, Seeking Help from the Boss. If it were just a simple technological iteration, or a minor technical update, and the new CEO demonstrated his abilities, perhaps everyone at Stark Films would follow his lead. Profitable business is respected no matter where it happens. But if the technology provided could impact the entire market, revolutionizing the film industry, few would dare to blindly follow such technology. What if they bet on the wrong horse? Would the entire Stark Films be ruined along with it? So, the things Henry had brought out were quickly reported to Tony Stark. Fortunately, the boss had given out so many special rewards the previous night that he was still at his Malibu Beach villa and hadn't flown back to the East Coast. This allowed him to show up at Stark Films in record time. When he appeared, he wasn't just yawning. Henry vaguely saw him walking with his hands on his waist. But when he saw a certain annoying person, Tony Stark straightened up and walked normally, as if nothing had happened. Truly, the Starks have stubbornness etched in their bones. Henry was discussing with the engineers in the manufacturing department how to package the unassembled camera, what could be omitted or reduced in size, and where to reserve space. When Tony Stark arrived with his team, he made his way to the film studio, where Henry had displayed his homemade equipment. Happy Hogan didn't let the executives who'd called in to complain approach him immediately. Tony approached Henry and examined the unsightly, patchwork camera. What did you make that scared those old guys like the world was ending, and they insisted I come over? You're so good as to just come over when they asked you to, Henry wondered. Didn't you excitedly invite a bunch of girls back to your villa yesterday to claim the reward? Unexpectedly, Tony didn't argue with his suspicion. Instead, he rubbed his nose in frustration. I just happened to be coming over to take a look. What's the problem? Could it be? Henry thought of a possibility. Could it be that the young master, having not had sex for so long, miscalculated the goblin's abilities and turned his lair into a pantsy cave, nearly getting killed by the goblins? He then used his job at Stark Films as an excuse to escape. Henry smirked at the young master's waist. Would you like me to recommend some Eastern remedies for kidney nourishment and sperm strengthening? Fuck. Am I here for that? I'm here for work. Work? Tony simply ignored Henry and turned to look at the anxious department heads who had been stopped by Happy and the others. Hey, you guys, come over here and tell me what's going on here. Greeted by their employer, the group was naturally led in by Happy and the other bodyguards. Fortunately, they didn't engage in a hasty exchange of arguments, irritating the young master. Instead, they elected a clearly articulate representative to step forward. Mr. Stark, it's true that Mr. Brown has brought new technology to Stark Films, and that's great. But we all feel that this new technology is so far-reaching that it threatens to challenge the existing film industry equipment landscape, not to mention competitors like Arri and Panorama. Even Japanese companies like Sony could become obstacles to the promotion of this new technology, and the entire film industry, led by Kodak, will hinder our development. It's like we're going to be at war with the entire world, and that won't benefit the company at all. After hearing everyone's concerns, Tony certainly wasn't quick to make a hasty judgment. He turned and looked at Henry. What's your take? Henry shrugged nonchalantly. From silent films to talkies, from black and white to color, there have always been some old folks who fear the impact of change, saying things like the film industry is going to collapse, but I don't blame them. After all, they were led by Mr. Howard Stark. Whether an improvement succeeds or fails, old Mr. Stark will bear the responsibility, and I'm just a nobody. I'm not surprised they were hesitant to cooperate. They just want a word from you, good or bad. If it goes wrong later, it won't be their fault. Tony didn't respond immediately, simply observing the new equipment. How does this thing perform? Can it be used now? Upon hearing Tony Stark's question, several engineers tinkering with the camera immediately jumped aside to allow the talented boss closer access. Henry, however, didn't let them go. Instead, he invited them over to try out the controls. He took charge of the explanations, explaining things to Tony while guiding the engineers. Although they were a little unfamiliar with the equipment, as fellow technicians, they didn't make any major mistakes. When Tony saw the digital camera's footage compared to 35mm film, he asked, "You said the resolution and color saturation could be improved, replacing traditional film. Technology will continue to evolve. The difference lies in who makes the difference." And I think saying replace is a bit exaggerated. It just gives users another option. Maybe some old-school directors insist on shooting on film, Tony still hadn't made up his mind and continued to watch the demonstrations. When he saw the Stark i486 struggling to run the editing software, his face turned as stinky as shit. A 4-year-old computer? Are you serious? Don't you think a 4-year-old computer can run this software? Just for that fact alone, you should admire me even more. And this is my personal property. You're not going to donate it, are you? Donate it to a museum. That's where it belongs, Tony said with disdain. Henry suddenly asked, is the computer department of Stark Industries still there? Why do you ask? Henry said, I want to say, I wonder if you have noticed along the way. Everyone still mainly works with traditional paper and pen, and there is no trend towards digitalization. Don't you feel obligated to help solve this problem of being eliminated? After all, this place is named Stark, not those fake Starks outside. And in the development of this digital film system, computers are the most important part. Even if you don't sponsor a batch of the latest computers, you should sell a batch to us at cost price. And in addition to computers, the talents in programming software and motor hardware must also be expanded. Especially the former, unless someone teaches themselves at home. I don't see anyone in the entire Stark films who can handle this problem, don't you have it? This time it was Tony's turn to smile evilly, like a farmer whipping a slave. Chapter 329 Capitalist Considerations. Henry maintained his nonchalant expression. Anyway, according to my contract with you, the technology I provided and the patents belong to me. I'll get a share of any jointly developed technology. You want to throw everything at me? Why would I object? Without a second thought, Tony Stark turned to the others and ordered, recruit personnel, expand the department. Give that mad fake bastard everything he wants. They say this genius is a capitalist first, a scientist second. He certainly knows where the profits lie. How could he possibly give it all away? Especially to a jerk? If he hadn't had a hidden agenda, Tony Stark wouldn't have signed that employment contract, which was practically an unequal treaty. However, Tony Stark looked at the i-486 computer, which still hadn't produced any results, and roughly calculated the time in his mind. He couldn't help but wonder, if, as you say, higher resolution cameras will have to be developed in the future for use in film production, that means the recorded footage will be larger, and post-production will take longer. Judging by this performance, even the latest top-of-the-line computers wouldn't be much more efficient. Technology needs to be built up, Henry explained. And you've remembered Moore's law, computer performance doubles every 18 months. Who knows how fast computers will be by the time this entire system is developed. If we were to follow the standards of existing commercially available personal computers, then developing this system wouldn't even be possible. It simply wouldn't run. But if we wait until computer performance is comparable, what's left for us? A thought suddenly struck Tony. You wouldn't be using something this slow as a tortoise, would you? Henry said. Hey, that's true. But think about it, this will eventually be sold as a commodity, and this is Stark Films. I can't possibly be manufacturing the necessary computer components for this system. I'd only consider it if Stark Industries didn't have a computer department today. As for the toys I have at home, they're just unremarkable gadgets. Tony rubbed his beard as he spoke. Computers are the future, and Stark Industries certainly can't give up on them. I'm simply scaling back our commercial personal computer business, but we can still produce computer equipment for weapon systems. If you're looking for something like Pixar's image processing computer, it's probably something like that. Without taking Moore's law into account, how can we simulate computer performance in a few years with existing computer components to aid development? Henry said. Use a multi-core system to split large files into smaller ones, allowing all cores to run a portion simultaneously. Finally, the process smaller files can be integrated. If we add this functionality to the software, then the more CPUs and memory capacity we have, the faster the film post-production process will be. An engineer who had been listening nearby asked in surprise, "Can we do that?" Henry replied, "This isn't film. A roll of film can only be cut and joined one way at a time. Even a crooked cut won't work. But a digital film file is essentially just a bunch of ones and zeros, while the program is running. Whether it's processed in separate chunks or all at once is irrelevant. Regardless of how it's broken down and scattered, the final product must be in a playable video format, a multi-core system," Tony said, stroking his beard as if to show off. Most designs currently on the market use commercial motherboards with 2 CPUs. If, as you say, the more CPUs, the greater the multi-core efficiency, how many do you plan to put in? 4? 8? Soldering more slots on the motherboard shouldn't be a problem, but the bridge chip would also need to be redesigned, otherwise how would multiple CPUs work together? If you want to achieve that, forget about adding more memory slots, just pack more memory chips. Anyway, it seems like many of these things are custom-made and can't be directly used as commercial products. But then, have you ever considered how much it would cost to build one of these things? Is it possible to sell it as a commercial product? Henry replied, if it's just for development, and you're only using these things ourselves, and we include the manufacturing costs in the R&D costs, external sales would be primarily software, with hardware as a supplement. Furthermore, once we build this specialized computer, we can use it ourselves or rent it out to others. Isn't that the same with independent film crews or small studios? They only rent editing studios when they need them. Is that even feasible? Although Tony Stark had some understanding of the operations of a film company, he still looked at the other film executives and asked for their opinions. Equipment rental and sales were handled by the equipment department's head, Mr. Stark. If we can indeed offer rental services, but that would be tantamount to declaring war on the entire film industry. If no one wants to use our new equipment, our investment won't pay off, and all this would be wasted. Well, Tony looked at Henry. Then let's do it, the film executives protested loudly. Mr. Stark, that won't work, Tony retorted. If that's what you're saying, we'd still be fighting with spears. We don't have rifles, let alone airplanes or artillery. Once the product is released, the market will naturally choose the most advantageous option. Unless we're defeated before then. But I'm also curious, who dares to challenge Stark to inherit Stark Corporation? At Tony's behest, Obadiah Stane undertook a corporate restructuring, streamlining Stark Corporation into a military-industrial complex. In the process, Stark Corporation divested itself of many industries. While some viewed this as a brilliant corporate transformation, the perception of him as a prodigal son still lingered among some. Although Henry had no intention of venturing beyond the military industry, he was developing film technology, which Tony considered to be computer technology. He tinkered with software and demanded that his hardware also match it. Strictly speaking, this was within his goals. Furthermore, internal integration was nearly complete, and Stark Industries had not only established a new structure but also a new network of relationships. It was time to show his strength. One cannot become the Lion King without defeating other lions. Rashly competing with other companies in the military industry would anger generals from other factions and influence those who supported him. For Tony, this involved a necessary risk. But if he showed off his prowess in other areas, the military would only become his backer. So, in Tony's eyes, Henry's film technology was a perfect opportunity. It could be said that this whole thing was in line with Tony Stark's grand strategy. Let Stark Films go out and try it out. Even if it was damaged, it wouldn't harm Stark Industries. Besides, Tony was now worried that the CEO of Stark Films he appointed would be a nobody in the eyes of a certain class of people. This guy took the initiative to jump out, so how could he not add fuel to the fire? He needed a computer with good performance. This happened to be in his own interests, so he built it. Chapter 330 West Coast Supercomputer Project. A rarely noticed aspect is the biggest difference in character between the Stark father and son. Howard Stark started his business from scratch. He built it to this scale through his exceptional skill and cunning, and he was not afraid to take risks. No matter what problems arose, he always found a solution, living up to his reputation as a brilliant mind. But each company was Howard's lifeblood, and he was reluctant to let go of any of them. This is why, by the time the Reigns came around, Stark Enterprises was not only bloated but also disorganized. Tony Stark inherited everything with no preparation, even some resistance. Therefore, once he had a clear goal, he was decisive in every move. He was equally unafraid of taking risks, but that didn't mean he was confident he could handle any situation. It was simply a sense of self-assurance that made Tony Stark's actions, in the eyes of some, impulsive. As the saying goes, the weak fear the strong fear the strong fear the stubborn, and the stubborn fear the desperate. To outsiders, this young master's current state was one of stupidity. It couldn't be helped, he'd never experienced the harshness of society, never honed his tact, yet already reached the pinnacle of the hierarchy. He didn't bully or let his dog bite anyone, which was already quite kind. So, determined, Tony Stark immediately discussed with Henry the configuration of the image processing computer. A group of executives tried to interrupt, but were unable to get a word in. Those who tried to grab the second-generation young master and call his attention to their opinions were immediately pulled away by Tony's bodyguards. The engineers were even more confused, unable to follow Henry and Tony Stark's discussion because they couldn't keep up. Perhaps just as they'd grasped the meaning of a term, the two had already wandered off to discuss something light years away. The engineers couldn't even make their presence felt. The subject of Henry and Tony Stark's discussion went beyond the realm of commercially available products, from motherboard layout to slot configuration. Both men were willing to build their own chips if needed. The only challenge they hadn't yet tackled was chip manufacturing. If something commercially available wasn't available, they'd just make it themselves. For Tony Stark, this was just another exercise for the computer department. Henry, on the other hand, was eager to install 32 CPUs in a single computer, with memory measured in gigabytes and hard drives not just in RAID configurations but in terabytes. He was seriously discussing how to implement such a computer architecture. Tony Stark, initially confused, found this exchange of ideas fascinating. After all, he'd rarely encountered someone with whom he could discuss professional knowledge. Most couldn't even keep up with his thinking. Henry, however, not only could he follow his ideas, but sometimes offered interesting insights that stimulated his creativity. Furthermore, both the men were aiming for feasible solutions, not just building a spaceship to conquer Mars. To record their ideas, they even had as many whiteboards as they could get their hands on. They discussed their ideas on the whiteboards, even using the two screens originally used for film screenings, writing with markers. As Tony Stark watched the design take shape, he suddenly calmed down. After a moment of reflection, he said, "Have you ever considered the issue of marginal utility? According to Moore's law, the performance we achieve now through sheer quantity will be achieved with half the number of components in 18 months. With your relentless pursuit of performance, how much does it cost to spend on one computer? If it's just pure R&D, that's fine, but if you want to rent out post-production equipment, it's definitely not just one or two machines. Not to mention building a market, you'll even have to figure out how to market it. So how many do you plan to build? How long is it expected that such equipment will be obsolete? Before it is eliminated, is it possible for the revenue to cover the cost? How to reduce the waste during the idle period? You can't have failed to think about these most basic issues. If you can solve such a problem, that is, build a supercomputer, I have no objection." After listening to Tony Stark's complaint, Henry smiled and sighed. "Wow, a supercomputer? That's exaggerated. Don't you want to review your own performance requirements? In some aspects, existing supercomputers are not as high as your requirements. You are using memory as a hard drive, and the hard drive is going to fill up a warehouse." Pulling over a whiteboard with no longer useful information on it, Henry wiped the writing clean. "Do you know a paper from 1974? Normalization Conditions for Virtualizable Third-Generation Architectures, a collaborative paper by Gerald J. Popek and Robert P. Goldberg? You want to make a system virtual machine," Henry explained. "Yes, that's it. In fact, as early as the 1960s, IBM's mainframe computers had CMS, Interactive Computing Single-User Operating System. It uses time-sharing processing of threads to give all users the illusion of using it at the same time. With today's hardware and software technology, we can do better. For example, we can create multiple virtual hosts on a single host and allocate different hardware resources. Who occupies more resources, who occupies less resources, and how the resources are allocated can all be determined by the number of users and the cost. And there's another advantage to doing this, that is, when the renter has finished editing their own movie, they can directly cut off the virtual host they rented. This way there's no need to worry about data leakage. In terms of specific design, we have two possible approaches. One is a system virtual machine, which provides complete control over allocated virtual resources. The other is operating system-level virtualization, which offers greater flexibility. As he spoke, Henry began writing on the whiteboard as he explained how this virtualization layer would be constructed. He noticed, however, that Tony Stark's questions were becoming increasingly sparse, as if his ideas couldn't keep up with his own pace. So, after a certain point, Henry stopped talking, so as not to give the young master the impression that he was showing off. Instead, he said, "If possible, I'd also like to build a supercomputer, but I've never seen anything like that, and I can't find any relevant papers. So, I can only base my work on commercially available personal computers and consider how to improve their performance. As for the balance between cost and expected benefits, We'll have to calculate it, Tony suddenly asked. What does CK mean? Isn't that Calvin Klein? Fuck. That's you. Tony threw down his pen. His face etched with displeasure. What do you mean by me? You're talking nonsense. A certain Kryptonian continued to play dead. When asked this kind of question, most people should question it first, and some people will just guess the answer. But you seem to have prepared an answer for a long time, so you can answer it at the first time. Even though this answer is misleading, haha. At this point, Henry didn't know what to say except playing dumb. Could it be that the concept of Docker was exposed? This was one of the technologies used to build the Joker BBS. People on the internet still use the name honeypot to refer to the computer trap. Although it has been exposed for a long time, the core technology has not been widely circulated. Because those who are capable of cracking it usually have their own work at hand and don't have the leisure to think about how to further explore the technology. Some people have built some similar functions according to the description, but no one has reached the same level so far. The most important thing is that apart from creating network traps and defending against hacker intrusions at the information security level, no one knows how else to use this function. Should we say that he is really a genius, with such a keen eye for technology? However, although he was unhappy, Tony didn't seem to want to pursue the matter further. He just had no interest in continuing the discussion. The young master said with a disgusting face, I will have someone give you the blueprints of the supercomputer built by Stark Industries in New York, as well as the relevant patent content. Based on those and today's ideas, please put together a design plan for me. It just so happens that I also want to build a supercomputer on the West Coast. Otherwise, I will have to do a lot of work on the East Coast. Don't you want to discuss the design plan? Tony, with an unhappy look on his face, said, what's there to discuss? Anyway, when your plan comes out, I will just revise it like a teacher grading students' homework and build it. You just need to prepare the software. When the time comes, some resources will be allocated to Stark Films to develop digital film post-production software. If people start renting post-production functions, the follow-up plan will be determined by the market. Wow, uncle, you really treat me as an employee. I paid for the construction of the supercomputer. Okay, boss, you have the final say. I have no objection. Money is the boss. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331 Geniuses Who Make Things Difficult for Each Other. Henry, yes, dear. Call me now if you need anything. In order to facilitate communication, Stark Films provided the latest mobile phones to its executives, and of course the CEO Henry also had one. But not many people have his phone now. In the same social circle, most people are still observing. They want to see how valuable this man is before deciding their attitude. Although the plan to digitize movie cameras has been widely circulated. But most people still believe that the leader is the genius of the Stark family, and Henry Brown is just a front. Because of this, not many people have his phone now, and even fewer people will call it. Charlize Theron is undoubtedly one of them. But she won't call if she doesn't have something to do. At least the two of them won't spend long phone calls just to talk about trivial matters. So, in her second sentence, Charlize got straight to the point. Can Jen come over to our house today and watch our acting practice? What made you invite her? Because she thinks I should go to proper acting school. But I didn't learn as much from you in Salvador as I did from you, so I declined. She really wants to see our training process. If she wants to come, I have no objection. Don't worry, Katie. With me here, that little cat can't hurt anyone. It's just, Charlize hesitated on the phone. Honey, just say whatever you want to say. Actually, although Jen hasn't said it directly, I can tell she's a little worried about our relationship. What's wrong? Henry was puzzled. It's not easy to blindly guess someone's thoughts. I think she wants you to play a role in my acting career, but she doesn't want your relationship with me to hinder it. Is that a problem? Henry consoled him. What's wrong with that? From an agent's perspective, if she didn't have that in mind, I'd actually question her professionalism, but don't worry, honey. We have plenty of time to spend together, but success should come early. You work hard where you feel it's needed, and I'll only support you. Thank you, baby. I love you, Charlize Theron said sweetly. Love you, darling. Feelings need to be reciprocated. Since the other party had expressed their feelings, Henry naturally wouldn't use the cautious words as he had before the time travel. Moreover, after living in the Western world for 4 or 5 years, if you say that at first he relied on acting to pretend to fit in, he had lost his pre-time travel style and had become more accustomed to the Western way of doing things. It can only be said that the environment really affects people. No wonder Mengyu moved 3 times. However, some things still come out of habit. Just like when Henry asked, "Are you guys coming back for dinner?" Charlize Theron said on the phone, "We have another audition this afternoon, and I don't know how late it will be. I won't miss the acting practice tonight, but I should eat outside with Jen before going home. Okay, I'll feed Katie first and let her lie down to digest her food. You know, that kitten is always so energetic when she's hungry." Is that energetic? Several times I thought Katie was drooling at me. Never mind. I'm busy here too. See you tonight. See you tonight. After hanging up the phone, Henry turned back. A group of people were setting up a special large computer in a large room. This was the West Coast supercomputer, built by Stark Industries' computer division, as Tony Stark had promised. Its theoretical computing power was the highest of any supercomputer in the world today. After all, it was the latest, but the gap with the next best was not far. This was because the supercomputer's focus wasn't on computing, but on image processing. While many parts were custom-made, they were still within Stark Industries' manufacturing capabilities. If something exceeded specifications, Tony Stark, back on the East Coast, would personally research solutions. This was Tony Stark's greatest value at Stark Industries right now. He led a research team to overcome manufacturing challenges. Whether it was substandard materials or substandard performance, his brilliant mind seemed to have an answer for every problem. With just a few pointers, Tony could ensure the team produced a qualified product. In a sense, the challenges others perceived as difficult presented no real challenge to Tony Stark. The only project he'd spent some time on recently was Henry's proposed supercomputer design. However, Tony Stark found few areas to fault. Some of the challenges were more likely due to the design's author challenging Stark Industries' manufacturing capabilities. This left Tony Stark with 2 options. One was to modify the design, perhaps with reduced performance, but at least it could be built. The other was to find a way to upgrade Stark Industries and produce the design. Henry wasn't simply trying to make things difficult. His designs were all within reasonable limits, or they were conceptual ideas based on research papers, concrete design concepts. They weren't some groundbreaking technology. He wasn't just sitting there on the West Coast handing over the designs and then sitting idle. Some of the newly recruited programmers were tasked with upgrading digital codecs. They'd first have to master the 1080p codec Henry provided, then work on 2K, 4K, and even 8K. Some people were tasked with perfecting the post-production software, encompassing editing, color grading, sound mixing, and special effects. The special effects here didn't refer to computer animation effects, but rather functions like adding subtitles. The editing process naturally involved the most advanced commercially available computers, provided by Stark Industries. Tony Stark even specifically instructed that the I-486 be consigned to a museum and not used any longer. He couldn't afford to lose face. Besides the software, Henry was also responsible for overseeing the assembly of the supercomputer components shipped from the East Coast. This was naturally handled by engineers supporting Stark Industries and newly recruited hardware engineers from Stark Pictures. However, the overall responsibility rested with Henry Brown, one of the designers. Tony Stark would ship the tested components to the West Coast. If any problems arose with the assembly process in Los Angeles, one could imagine the ridicule Henry would face. In short, it was like 2 brilliant minds challenging each other. But neither backed down from such a challenge. They disdained to deliberately create obstacles for each other or set traps. However, if one can't keep up with the other's thinking, they'll have to call for help and be scolded before being taught a lesson. However, in this silent battle between the East and West Coasts, Henry still has a slight advantage. He's simply responsible for monitoring the assembly progress and keeping an eye on the progress of the codec and software. After all, he was the one who came up with the design, so it's not unreasonable to take advantage of it later. So, even before the end of the day, the CEO slipped away. This was a dream come true for him as a working man. There were other things to do in the evening. Chapter 332 Today's Evening Class. Ding dong, the doorbell rang. Henry, who was adjusting the camera, put down his work and went to open the door. Charlize Theron was standing there. Though her expression was a little tired, there was also a hint of anticipation. Henry called out, "Come in, dear." The girl excitedly rushed over and kissed him. It was a split second, no time wasted on idle affection. Of course, there was a guest still in the hallway. "Jen, come in." Seeing J.J. Harris, Henry naturally didn't forget to greet her. "Ms. Harris, it's been a while." "Good day, Mr. Brown." "Sorry to bother you." Even though the entrance was clear, J.J. Harris still looked inside with concern, not daring to rush in. Henry knew what she was worried about. He smiled and said, "Worried about Katie? Don't worry, she's fed and resting. She won't bother us." He pointed casually to a high steel cat climbing frame where a large tiger lay on its side. A casual swish of its tail confirmed the creature was alive, not just some kind of carpet decoration. "You really have a tiger?" J.J. Harris was stunned. "What tiger?" "It's a tabby cat. It's just fat," Henry continued to lie. "Okay, Katie the tabby cat. Does she really not bite?" J.J. Harris asked anxiously, watching the tiger's head lift, his entire body lurching back in fear. "Don't worry, Jen, Katie really doesn't bite." Charlize stood inside, having already placed her bag on the shelf by the door. "As long as you don't put your hands in her mouth." "Charlize, that's not funny." "Okay, I apologize." "Don't worry, Katie's habits are like a cat's. She won't sniff you around like a dog." "Okay, that's better." J.J. Harris, holding onto the door frame, cautiously entered the house. The first thing he noticed was, of course, the strange layout of the house and the various steel climbing frames, high and low, along the walls. This goes to show that if you see a tiger, don't assume you can survive by climbing up. They're far more adept at climbing higher than modern humans. However, the projection screen and camera Charlize mentioned immediately caught J.J. Harris's attention. Henry had taken the old digital camera to the equipment department at Stark Films, where he had the engineers disassemble it as a prototype. The camera they were using at home was a second-generation, handmade digital camera. It had some minor flaws corrected and performance improved slightly compared to the previous generation. You can't just give the new stuff to others while you use the broken stuff yourself. That's not thriftiness, it's self-abuse. As a professional agent and producer, J.J. Harris was no stranger to camera equipment. She stepped forward to examine it for a moment, then turned to Henry and asked, "Can I touch it?" "Yes," Henry said, preparing to play the videotape. Although VCDs existed at the time, the resolution was only 320 x 240. To put it into digital terms, it was even worse than 240p's 426 x 240. Moreover, a movie typically requires 2 discs, with longer films requiring 3. Authentic VHS tapes, provided the source material is high enough and not a remastered copy, can reach a resolution of up to 720 x 480. This is close to 480p's 854 x 480 resolution. Therefore, in terms of image quality, VHS tapes offer superior quality over VCDs. Henry's tapes were rented, but they were genuine ones from Blockbuster. The image quality was guaranteed. Meanwhile, J.J. Harris, eyeing the digital camera, couldn't help but wonder. This is the rumored secret weapon of Stark Films. Everyone thinks it was Tony Stark's idea. If Charlize hadn't told me, I wouldn't have believed you were the first to come up with it. Hasn't anyone approached you about collaborating? Henry, you said it yourself. Everyone thinks it was Tony Stark's idea. Who would have approached me? Henry said self-deprecatingly. J.J. Harris said, "You don't know. Sony's Nyono Odin, the Japanese behind Columbia Pictures, is furious about this. He's been trying to contact Tony Stark but can't. They're incredibly passionate about setting standards. They've even been known to fight amongst themselves over videotapes, leaving rivers of blood flowing. I heard they were collaborating with Philips on a new generation of optical discs to set the next standard, and then Stark Pictures suddenly comes out, saying they're going to produce digital cameras for film. They were still gloating over the upcoming TV quality DV, only to see a giant step on their heels." Henry laughed. The Japanese. The booming economy of the past few years made them think they were on top of the world. I guess some still believe the current economic stagnation is just a period of accumulating momentum. Once they're ready, they'll take off again. J.J. Harris was discussing industry gossip. Haha, those two co-chairmen of Sony Pictures Entertainment, John Peters and Peter Guber, have been making these claims quite a bit lately. If they hadn't been there, the Japanese would have stormed Hollywood and taken over Stark Films. So you owe them a huge favor, those two. Henry suddenly lowered his voice and asked mysteriously, are they really that capable? Perhaps their greatest skill is playing tricks on the clueless Japanese. Henry laughed, and stopped discussing the gossip. Looking at Charlize Theron, who was already sitting on the sofa, he said, it's getting late today, so let's skip the movie and get straight to the interesting parts of the film. The movie we're going to watch today is Annie Hall, a romantic comedy directed by Woody Allen and released in 1977. It won the 50th Academy Awards for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Actress. The lead actress is Diane Keaton. At the time of filming, she was 30 years old and in a relationship with Woody Allen. So, it's not an exaggeration to say that this film is an autobiography of both of them. Although Diane Keaton is mostly playing herself in the film contains many quirks and a self-deprecating sense of humor, traits not unique to the character but inherent to Diane Keaton herself. But Woody Allen's script and directing techniques, combined with her own fashion sense, create a truly captivating character. You can think of Annie Hall as the perfect version of herself, as seen through the eyes of both the actress and her lover, but such a well-tailored film is hard to come by. I also couldn't bear to hand you over to that director, as everyone knows his personality. Henry kissed the back of Charlize's hand, making the girl feel shy, while J.J. Harris, a middle-aged woman, giggled. Although the actress can be said to be playing her true self, I think there are still many things worth learning from her performance in the film. Otherwise, she wouldn't have won the Best Actress Oscar. Chapter 333, Difficult to Promote Acting Courses. J.J. Harris's observations from the sidelines. Rather than calling Henry Brown a mere cinephile or professional critic, she felt his analysis of the film felt more like director Woody Allen personally explaining his ingenious ideas. While he didn't dwell too much on cinematography, Henry explained the effect of each frame whenever it came to character development. Then, like a psychologist, he explained each character's subtle expression and glance, laying them out like a book, clearly laid out before her eyes. Having someone nearby to explain the film significantly impacted the viewing experience. But for an actor, understanding and learning from a film is crucial. When it came time to perform the imitation, the two would select from several highlights of the lead actress. Charlize would first spend some time memorizing her lines, then stand in front of the digital camera and perform without props. No makeup or costume changes were required. If props were needed, they would simply grab something similar and act it out. The first performance was based on Charlize's own interpretation, and then they would immediately watch the camera capture the result. Henry would then adjust the projection screen so that Charlize's performance played simultaneously with clips from the film. The goal was to compare the dynamics between Charlize Theron's performance and the original actresses. He wasn't trying to time their performances exactly the same. From facial expressions to movement and line articulation, Henry would review Charlize's performance in every detail. He didn't discuss the differences between Charlize and the original actress, but rather compared their differences, the impact they left on the audience, and which performance was most appropriate for the film. He emphasized how to act in front of the camera, not just the performance itself. He emphasized understanding the director's camera work and projecting the best or most appropriate side of herself, what's known as camera sense. After this review, the two would perform and film the same scene again, reviewing it a second time. Sometimes they would review it a third time, but sometimes they wouldn't, moving directly to the next scene. Sometimes, Henry would approach the scene like an exam, hoping Charlize would deliver different takes on the same scene. Charlize would then have to figure out how to use a different accent and movement to create a different persona and provide the audience with a different sensory experience. During this process, J.J. Harris, observing from the sidelines, saw the full potential of Charlize Theron's acting. While her performance was a bit awkward due to certain settings, with careful refinement, she could achieve perfection. However, as Henry had said, he wasn't trying to train Charlize to perform like Diane Keaton or her Annie Hall performance. He was simply learning and honing the techniques. Including film viewing, the entire acting session lasted 3 or 4 hours, ideally before midnight. The session was intense, with Charlize only able to take a sip of water or rest while Henry operated the machine and played the film. They often discussed the strengths and weaknesses of specific performance segments in front of the projected screen. However, today, Charlize Theron and J.J. Harris had been traveling all day for auditions. With the guests present, Henry didn't insist on continuing the session until 11 or 12. Feeling the heat was about right, he concluded the session. Henry duly offered a glass of vegetable juice. Unlike the usual vegetable juices with their strange, peculiar flavor, Henry had carefully researched the recipe to come up with this thirst-quenching drink that was both flavorful and nutritious. Since J.J. Harris would be driving home later, Henry didn't offer her an alcoholic beverage. Instead, after asking, he presented her with a glass of the same vegetable juice. J.J. Harris, not bothering to compliment the juice, asked, "Henry, are you interested in taking on more students?" Henry, sipping the same juice, paused, then smiled and retorted, "Then what do you think is an appropriate tuition fee?" Stunned by the question, J.J. Harris then remembered that he was the CEO of Stark Films. His annual salary was at least $1 million, and even compared to the Big 8 studios, a salary of $10 million wouldn't be out of the question. It all depended on Tony Stark's willingness to pay. It wasn't tax season yet, so unless he disclosed the figure, no one could find out. Asking someone like him to teach ordinary actors how to act, using the same equipment, the same methods, and the same amount of time. Honestly, if Charlize Theron weren't his girlfriend today, it's hard to say whether he would receive such treatment. No wonder Charlize said she didn't need to go to acting school, just practice with you. But not many acting schools let students see themselves in front of the camera, J.J. Harris lamented. Henry laughed. If they wanted to, they could just get a V8 and a TV. But with so many students, a 2-hour class might not even be enough for a full shift. So, you can't really blame them for not wanting to do that. Then Charlize suddenly asked, "Henry, I have a question. Sometimes you let me practice acting as an actor, and I'm fine with that. But it seems you've never picked an action movie for me to practice." "You said action movies, didn't you?" Henry packed up the tapes, picked up the box, and shook it at Charlize. "If you want to act in an action movie, you only need to perform at 1/10 the level of a feature film. The rest is about pulling off the moves beautifully, making you look cool and impressive. Then, if the director wants to create some big explosions, you're willing to do it yourself. If you can capture most of the scenes, 9 out of 10 times you'll have no problem. Action films require more physical strength than acting, and your physique needs to be systematically shaped and trained so you can perform more and better moves. Expression and acting aren't the key points, just don't be too bad. Of course, knowing how to protect yourself is also crucial. Being able to perform most of the scenes is a good thing, but getting injured and slowing down filming is more of a loss than a gain. As for the tricks and techniques involved, it's hard to explain them to you unless you're on set. There are many things you won't understand unless you've experienced or seen them. Basically, you just need to build up your physical fitness first." "Is that so?" Charlize said, her voice a mix of disappointment and something else entirely. J.J. Harris, surprised by the look, said, "Action? You're into that?" Nodding heavily, Charlize said, "I hope to explore a wide range of genres, not be stuck in one particular image. Of course, having more opportunities is a good thing, Ms. Harris," Henry added, but he was interrupted. J.J. Harris said, "Mr. Brown, please call me Jen." Just like Charlize does. "Okay, then please call me Henry too." What I'm saying is, there's no need to limit Charlize's future. I'm sure you can see she has great potential. Let's help a girl with unlimited potential realize her dream of becoming a superstar. Katie, perched on the cat tree, roared at the perfect moment. It nearly frightened J.J. Harris, but it also exuded an indescribable sense of command. Chapter 334, The Ambiguous Distance. Charlize Theron, of course, didn't forget that she also shared a room with 2 roommates, with a room to herself. She didn't always sleep at Henry's place, though she enjoyed their time together. But she was a disciplined person, and whenever her schedule allowed, she'd go for a jog early in the morning. It was the easiest exercise to maintain and improve fitness. She'd even drag Henry along for a morning run, since he was a lazy guy who only cared about sunbathing and not exercise. But one day, Henry suddenly decided to take Katie along for a morning run, and after causing a scene, Charlize gave up on the idea. It wouldn't be possible to have a cat and a man like that in the city. But in the suburbs, they could easily run to a point where Charlize, who considered herself quite fit, couldn't even see her back. So, after a few sessions, the idea of him joining her for training faded. Charlie's inability to convince him to become a running partner was a minor flaw among Henry's many strengths. Henry wasn't exactly a clingy person. Just like a cat, if you're close to it, you can get close and pet it. But if you're not close to it, for every 2 steps forward, Henry will take 4 back. You'll never catch up. This perfect distance allows Charlize Theron to focus most of her time on work, without worrying about her boyfriend getting lonely and looking for other women. After all, since J.J. Harris became her agent, Charlize Theron's schedule has increased, leaving her with less time to spend with her boyfriend. Although most of the time, they're just running hopeless auditions, opportunities arise through these attempts. Without the attempts, there are no opportunities. This not only affects Charlize's ability to stay overnight at Henry's place, but sometimes even her evening acting practice may be impossible. While there aren't many auditions in the evening, there are occasional, affordable events where J.J. Harris takes Charlize Theron to meet producers and directors, without necessarily offering her a date. But if you want to meet more people and have more opportunities, these kinds of occasions are unavoidable. If there's a difficult person at a party, J.J. Harris might even ask Henry to accompany him. With a film company CEO acting as a protector, those who can't control their lower bodies will be more restrained, even if they secretly despise Henry Brown. While the CEO of Stark Films hasn't been recognized by those in the industry, it's still easy to mess with that position. Cutting off filming equipment rentals with one move, anyone wouldn't be upset, unless it's a project for a Big 8 studio. Besides these kinds of parties, Charlize Theron's evening schedule includes occasional cover work. Until her acting salary can support herself, part-time work is essential. Her shifts are primarily daytime, but she occasionally covers for nights. Although Henry can support her and has hinted at moving in with him and eating his meals, the stubborn girl insists on living independently, rather than relying entirely on another person, especially a man. Although he hadn't learned this from Charlize, his memories from before the time travel revealed that the superstar had an abusive father. His mother had even shot him to death to protect herself and her daughter, such a horrible past. He didn't know if the same thing had happened in this world, and Henry certainly couldn't ask. But based on his previous experience, some people's life experiences would be similar to what he knew before the time travel, with only minor differences. It seemed he was a variable, but he could only change the future, which hadn't yet happened. Whether it was altered depended on the extent of his intervention. As for the past, of course, nothing could change it. Even Superman could only reverse a day to save his beloved. If anyone wanted to mess with the timeline, it had to be the Flash. But when the Flash moved the timeline, it was the prelude to something bigger. It couldn't be small, and the ending was certainly not happy. It would only be worse. Until the Flash's death. God bless the Marvel Universe without the Flash. Henry, who hadn't considered treating Charlize Theron like an accessory, strapped to his waist and forbidden to go anywhere, naturally had to resist the urge to cling to that soft, sweet body constantly and go about his business as usual. For example, rented videotapes have a return deadline. Waking early in the morning, Henry saw Baby, freshly escaped from a tiger's mouth, roll in front of him, and a mechanical notification chimed. Today is the return deadline for your rented videotapes. Late fees will apply if you miss. Please note, after finally uttering a few words, Baby was swept aside by Katie's tiger claw. Before it hit the wall, the rotating spherical robot sprayed high-pressure air toward the predicted impact point, mitigating the force of the impact. This car robot, already in who knows how many generations of revisions, was a bloody battle of wits and courage with Katie. While he could apply his own tiger repellent to Baby, considering the little creature's tendency to move around, wouldn't it mean it would get everywhere? If Katie ultimately became completely inert, or if she broke through the tiger repellent and began moving freely, ignoring its range, neither would be a good outcome. So Henry abandoned the idea of using the repellent to protect the little robot and continued to fight the tiger chasing him with his mobility. Katie didn't just wave Baby away because he was tired of playing. It was because it was almost dinner time, and he was glaring at the Kryptonian biped, eager for his meal. After petting the tiger's head, Henry went into the bathroom to brush his teeth and wash his face. The butcher who had delivered the meat hadn't arrived yet, and Katie was anxious but helpless. She stretched out her leg, pushed Katie out, and closed the door. You know the most troublesome part of raising a large pet? Preventing them from drinking from the toilet. While animals instinctively seek clean, running water, Henry couldn't help but worry. What if this tiger, raised in a Kryptonian home since childhood, had a questionable IQ? Instead of teaching him about this, it would be better to instill in him the habit of closing the door. So the bathroom was one of the few quiet places in the house Katie couldn't enter. As Henry exited the bathroom, the doorbell rang. Pulling a few bills from his wallet, Henry dodged the tabby cat, who tried to squeeze between his legs and obstruct the biped's progress, to reach the door and open it. The butcher was carrying warm meat in a plastic bag. He remembered to wave and say, "Hello, Katie." He stretched out his leg to push the tabby cat back. The cat had tried to pounce on the butcher more than once. Whether it was overly excited about the food he brought, or overly excited about him, it wasn't a good thing. So Henry had to push the big guy away, until he was so close that his claws couldn't reach him. He handed over the bills, then took the plastic bag and said, "Thanks, Little John, for bringing it up again today." Yes, another one named John. Henry wondered if he gathered 7 Johns, a big John would appear and grant his wish. "Mr. Brown, can I pet Kitty? Feed her, too," Little John requested. Henry looked at the younger man with a strange look. "What are the chances you'll get your hand bitten off if you try to feed this little creature meat?" Of course, Henry ignored the young man's request and flatly refused. Chapter 335 Supercomputer Under Construction. After sending off a butcher who'd been wanting to pet a tiger all day, and preparing Katie's breakfast and lunch, Henry grabbed his expired videotapes and headed to Blockbuster before heading to work at Stark Films. One of the great things about being a CEO is that there's no clock in or clock out time. You can go when you want, leave when you want. The downside is that it's easy to be seen as a 24/7 employee. If a problem arises, you'll be called on your official mobile phone, making it impossible to avoid. Fortunately, he'd just taken over, and Stark Films, which focused on equipment rental and sales, was a relatively unknown force in Hollywood, so there weren't many issues that needed to be addressed after hours. The supercomputer installation was being handled by professionals, and Henry was there to monitor progress and resolve any problems. His absence wouldn't cause the entire operation to stall. So, Henry could drive calmly, enjoy his breakfast leisurely, and then return the videotapes to Blockbuster. Of course, it was still early in the morning, so Blockbuster wasn't even open yet. But they had a return box. All they had to do was drop off the tapes. Once the store opened, the staff would log them in and return them. They didn't have to comply with Blockbuster's business hours to return the tapes. Because they were open in the evenings, Blockbuster's morning hours were much later than normal. After all that was settled, Henry finally arrived at Stark Films and watched the engineers assemble the supercomputer codenamed Hollywood Kid. Honestly, Tony Stark, while a brilliant mind, wasn't exactly gifted at naming. Iron Man, given by the media. AI number 1, Jarvis, named after the family's old butler. AI number 2, Friday, a supporting character from the famous film Robinson Crusoe, the Jericho missile, named after the ancient city in the West Bank, north of Jerusalem, boasting over 3,000 years of history. In the Bible, it was called Jericho, the city of palms. The missile's code name is based on the Old Testament story that Jericho was destroyed by God. Anyone attempting to rebuild it would be cursed by God. Their daughter, Morgan, is actually a common name for a female name in English. Originally mentioned in Arthurian legend, Morgan Le Fay. Morgan Le Fay is a French paraphrase, meaning Fairy Morgan. However, in legendary stories, this character often appears as an evil witch. It's hard to understand what Tony expects of his daughter. Should she be able to make a bad man regret his actions? Karen, the AI that later powers Spider-Man's suit, has become a derogatory term for a privileged woman, not a loving, neighborly older sister. It suggests a certain wickedness. If you dare mess with me, Spider-Man, I'll electrocute you. Therefore, the inclusion of a child-restricted mode seems perfectly natural. After Tony Stark's death, Edith, the artificial intelligence that controlled most of Stark Industries' technology, had a name as risque as Even Dead I'm the Hero. In short, the naming itself was hardly more than a parody. It's easy to understand why the supercomputer Stark Industries built on the West Coast was named Hollywood Kid, and who was being mocked. Henry, the target of the ridicule, believed that money was king. After all, Tony Stark paid for it, and he could get it for free, so why couldn't he tolerate a few insults? Henry, who considered himself a nobody, didn't understand the idea of saving face over substance. Furthermore, his homemade server-class computer was far inferior to the performance of a full-fledged supercomputer. While the Hollywood Kid was primarily used for image processing, It wasn't completely useless for other tasks. Once Henry had the access and the back door, he could use it however he pleased. He just had to be careful not to use too many resources to avoid detection. Furthermore, with a supercomputer as a foundation, codec upgrades and iterations could be much faster. Otherwise, with current commercially available computer hardware, playing high-definition videos would stutter. This wasn't just a lag caused by the network connection, but rather a lag caused by insufficient hardware. It was unpleasant to watch. In this situation, simply testing the video playback would waste countless hours waiting for the computer to start up, effectively slowing down progress. So, who wouldn't want a better computer? If anyone was more eager for the supercomputer's completion than Tony Stark, it was undoubtedly Henry. However, he didn't rush the engineer's work. Since all the parts hadn't arrived from the East Coast yet, there was no point in rushing the work. Besides monitoring the supercomputer's construction progress and compiling the film post-production software, Henry spent most of his time pondering how many cutting-edge technologies he could use if he built his own supercomputer. Although he was the designer of the Hollywood Kid, his creations weren't significantly beyond the technological level of the time. For example, the chip manufacturing process was still at the micron level, not the nanometer standard. In other words, if he used all his skills, he could build a computer that surpassed the Hollywood Kid in every aspect of its performance. The challenge lay in size and power consumption. A home computer is only slightly larger than a typical desktop, and its power consumption is kept under 350 W. The Hollywood Kid is roughly the size of a 20-foot shipping container, and a terrifying power-hungry monster. Its cables are as thick as an arm. Its power consumption led Tony Stark to consider building a large-scale arc reactor on the West Coast, a contraption still a laboratory product on the East Coast. The arc reactor, which uses palladium, was a project led by Howard Stark. So far, it has only been used in Stark Industries laboratories and has not yet entered the commercial stage. Not to mention the small arc reactor used in the Iron Man suit, even the shadow of this little gadget hadn't been seen yet. Perhaps Tony hadn't even considered it. Considering that the arc reactor is actually a cold nuclear reaction from the world before Henry's time travel, which no one had yet achieved, it's still essentially a form of nuclear fusion. It's not a diesel generator, you can do whatever you want with no government oversight. Nuclear power plants in the United States are regulated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. This includes the sale of raw materials and the installation of nuclear power plants. Building without a permit is a crime punishable by prison. Especially when it comes to nuclear waste disposal, it's not something you can simply dump in the trash or down the drain. Not to mention Tony Stark's planned construction site, the Stark Studios building in downtown Los Angeles. Convincing the Los Angeles city government and appeasing the city council members would be a huge undertaking. Calculating the licensing fees, construction costs, and ongoing maintenance costs, Tony Stark quickly abandoned his plan to build a commercial arc reactor on the West Coast. Just pay the electricity bill. It's cheaper that way. While I regret not being able to see the blueprints or the actual arc reactor itself, that regret is fleeting. From my experience dealing with him recently, I'm sure you shouldn't mistake Tony Stark for a scientific genius and a business idiot. He's quite the shrewd fellow. Just take a look at the arc reactor blueprints and see how much he'll spill later. Who knows if his slip-up and then retracted opinions are just bait to lure you in. Chapter 336, Tony Stark's Transformation. Building a supercomputer is no small undertaking for any country. But in the United States, it doesn't seem to be a big deal either. Any academic or research institution with even a modicum of strength can build one, as long as they find financial backing. To maintain America's image as a technological powerhouse, the wealthy are sparing no effort. But what's the point of the entertainment industry building a supercomputer? Throwing fish into the pond? This is what Hollywood insiders don't understand about Stark Pictures. They don't know whether to fear it, suppress it, or accept it. Regarding the vast film market, Stark Pictures' new CEO, Henry Brown, hasn't aggressively entered the film production business. Although there are rumors that he wants to promote his girlfriend, under the guidance of seasoned agent J.J. Harris, this woman, barely a minor star, hasn't resorted to shelling out cash to secure roles in popcorn or chick flicks. They're not shy about taking supporting roles, but they want to work with big stars and directors. They won't touch projects that are clearly investment scams. While everyone on the crew and the actors still received their salaries, only the investors and production companies were left feeling the pain. They weren't limited to a specific genre when applying for auditions. This young actress could be seen auditioning for everything from cheesy comedies to thrillers and action films. It seems the girlfriend of the new CEO of Stark Pictures didn't seem to have any help from her man. But those trying to get a red socket reception or impose on him couldn't ignore her boyfriend's status. As always, Stark Pictures had no power over how other companies' films were produced, nor did they have any influence over their box office success. However, it was easy for a company that controlled most of Hollywood's equipment to derail a project. No one was sure if this young man would act like a mad dog if he messed with his woman. Young men like this, who rose from humble beginnings to immense wealth, were the most unstable. Just like his boss, the playboy Tony Stark, he had become a headache for the industry. Stark's earlier dormancy seemed like an act of patience meant to seize power and transform Stark Industries. Once the entire company was under control and Stark's crown was secure, the young man immediately descended into a life of debauchery, drenched in philandering. Even more damning, he didn't shy away from reporters. He didn't just select women deemed safe after screening. He also never suppressed the news. In other words, if others tried to use such things as evidence, he wouldn't even bother to respond. Regarding nude photos and gossip, Tony would simply ask, "Do you look good in the photos? If not, don't publish them, it's embarrassing." His private life might seem chaotic, but for an unmarried man, as long as he didn't involve minors, violence, or coercion, no one could legally judge him. He could only be criticized on a moral level. For such a shameless young man, what a big deal. But for a certain group, Tony Stark's transformation was a good thing. Stark Industries was no longer the aggressive figure it once was. Business negotiations were under the helm of the more disciplined Obadiah Stane. Now that everyone was happily collaborating, unnecessary petty maneuvers could be put to rest. It was common knowledge that a stable environment was the best place to make money. And there was no need to plunge Stark Industries into another period of turmoil. However, the fact that Stark Industries had become more restrained didn't mean the young heir had learned to be content. Many people couldn't understand his decision to attack Stark Films. After all, it had nothing to do with the overall situation, so many sat back and waited for the outcome. Only one group remained restless. These were the companies, led by Sony, who were constantly digging deeper into the field of imaging technology. It was like everyone was happily fighting with spears, while others were developing arquebuses and creating groundbreaking three-stage strike tactics, thinking they would dominate the world. Then someone suddenly appeared with an AK-47 with unlimited ammunition, declaring a massacre. How could this be tolerated? It was just that none of the companies immediately jumped in or took action to suppress Stark Films. Because who knows if those are just empty promises, just rumors. This kind of bragging that throws opponents off balance only to ultimately destroy them has just happened. It was the US Star Wars program and the collapse of the Red Empire. While there's no strong causal relationship between the two, they're not completely unrelated. Stark Films' announcement of film digitization, coupled with its plans to build a supercomputer, was seen by some as a smokescreen with unclear objectives. Anyone who got too impatient or panicked would have fallen into their trap. Therefore, the film industry's leaders only offered sour, dark rhetoric, and no one believed Stark Films could achieve a quantum leap. Everyone was still arguing over DVD specifications, and someone was about to fast forward to the next generation? They simply observed, but didn't truly take it seriously. This phenomenon persisted until the supercomputer, codenamed Hollywood Kid, was completed. Stark Films' film digitization efforts immediately yielded results. The new camera wasn't yet capable of directly replacing 35mm film, nor did it intend to. Stark Films simply launched a movie camera with superior image quality compared to the tape-based digital cameras used by television stations. Its target audience was B-movie production companies that were going directly into the videotape market rather than releasing their films theatrically. A key focus for this customer segment was cost control. With limited sales, lower costs naturally meant higher profit margins. Unlike traditional cameras, where expensive 35mm film was rendered useless after a breakage or glitch, digital movie cameras that used hard drives for storage not only allowed users to view their footage immediately but also to delete and reshoot unsatisfactory footage. The cost difference between the two was significant, even without a detailed calculation. Users who had used the digital editing studios rented by Stark Films found that while not necessarily more convenient or user-friendly than traditional studios, the difference was not unacceptable. It simply required learning a new method of operation. Furthermore, Stark Films offered a subsidy program during the promotional period for the new equipment, further reducing costs for producers. All these factors made the customers in the B-movie videotape market switch from traditional movie cameras to Stark Films digital movie cameras without hesitation. Chapter 337, Emerging New Technologies. Besides rapidly dominating the videotape-based, non-theater market, the new digital film technology also quietly took over Stark Films' new equipment. These were the adult filmmakers in the San Fernando Valley. These producers also primarily used videotapes, previously using tape-based television cameras. But with the new digital cameras, subsidized for widespread adoption and significantly cheaper to use, it was inevitable that they wouldn't switch sides. Furthermore, the digital-to-film transfer technology could produce prints suitable for theatrical projectors. To most viewers, the results of Stark Films' digital cameras on the big screen were not much different from those of traditional 35mm film cameras. Although, under the discerning eye of professionals, the difference was noticeable. However, the publication of this research, developed with the University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts, attracted many young filmmakers interested in the big screen but struggling with limited funds. Not everyone could afford to trade expensive 35mm film for the image quality, foregoing the tools that could be constantly refined for even better acting. While not all of these people jumped ship for Stark Films' new equipment, if half of them did, that's a significant number. Consequently, Stark Films' new equipment was in short supply in the rental market. Henry didn't increase the number of digital movie cameras he rented out, as rentals were subsidized. This meant that Stark Film lost money on every digital camera he rented out, gaining publicity. He only manufactured new cameras to sell if someone was interested in purchasing them. His current approach was to cultivate the market, rather than rushing headfirst into the traditional 35mm film market. So, he needed to first release a batch of cameras and get everyone accustomed to their use. Henry focused most of his energy on guiding the digital image encoding team to develop the 4K, or UHD, standard. The new equipment Stark Film was offering was actually old technology that Henry had already mastered. The film studio's engineers were simply packaging these mature technologies into commercially viable products for rental or sale. However, Henry hadn't yet mastered 4K encoding, so he had to keep an eye on it. The reason they didn't personally handle the project was that with higher image quality, the storage media, the hard drive, also needed a larger capacity. Otherwise, even with the improved image quality, a commercially available high-capacity hard drive would only be able to record 3 minutes of footage, which would be a joke. Stark Industries was handling the hard drive capacity issue. This was another challenge from Henry to Tony Stark. However, both of them tacitly agreed not to personally lead the research team. Instead, after formulating a plan, they delegated the physical work to their subordinates and regularly monitored progress. The main reason for handing things off was, of course, that both of them were overwhelmed with extra chores. Tony Stark, the playboy, was busy dating models. Supermodels, dreaming of becoming his official girlfriend, or even Mrs. Stark, lined up to see how compatible they were with Tony Stark in bed. They seemed to believe that by doing so, they could cross the social ladder. The young master was enjoying this, making it hard to tell who was collecting stamps. As for Henry, after the launch of his digital movie camera rental business, he received more invitations to film industry events. Occasionally, he'd even visit campuses, where, despite his lack of education, he'd extol the future of digital imaging in front of students and professors. His speeches weren't all about 35mm film. Henry always emphasized that current digital film was still inferior to traditional film, attempting to mitigate hostility from the traditional film camp. Those with ambitions in digital imaging technology, led by Sony, were blatantly hostile to Stark Films, and indeed, Henry. They launched a comprehensive attack from legal, ethical, and technical perspectives. Even if the other party couldn't stand their ground on patents, Sony hoped to drag Stark Films into a quagmire of litigation. By keeping their opponent bogged down in litigation, they had time to prepare a counterattack. Had Henry fought this whole matter alone, whether in court or through legal representation, he wouldn't have been able to prevail against a wealthy legal team hired by Sony. In the legal battle, the other side wasn't looking to win, only to drag it out. A Kryptonian's fists, however powerful, were just that. But Henry simply called in Stark's legal team, and those matters were no longer his business. The industry and the film industry employed the same people. Henry experienced the comfort of leaning against a powerful tree. According to Tony Stark, the legal fees were already high, and if they weren't allowed to make a move, wouldn't that be a waste of legal fees? Furthermore, if they lost this unwinnable case, it would mean they were no longer useful and could be fired. Another unspoken reason for Tony was that this was a training opportunity, which he also hoped for. I can't beat Boeing or Lockheed Martin, so why can't I beat Sony? As for the moral aspect, what could the other side criticize? It was just some fabricated news in the tabloids to upset Henry. If this guy were truly an ordinary young man, he'd probably have stormed off to Sony America's headquarters in New York and started a scene. But Henry, acting like nothing had happened, continued to eat, drink, and live a comfortable life. Having lived through the era of keyboard warriors, how could he possibly be so disturbed by such a small remark? It's not that some people haven't considered targeting Charlize Theron. But perhaps these people were being too self-critical, figuring that a mere girlfriend wouldn't make a big difference. After trying one or two reports and getting no response from Henry, they abandoned the idea. Most importantly, they had no incriminating evidence. They simply fabricated stories of dirty dealings and underhanded dealings between Henry and Charlize Theron. With the intervention of Henry and J.J. Harris, Charlize's anger was finally subdued. The public was simply forced to file a formal defamation lawsuit through the studio's PR team. The news involving Henry, the CEO, didn't quite amount to misuse of public resources for his girlfriend. This didn't hit the right spot, making Charlize Theron, who really has a weak spot, furious. Otherwise, Henry didn't know if he could persuade her. On the other hand, this little actor who was not even a minor star and basically just moved between crews for auditions really didn't have much news value. Even if it was reported, readers would first just be suspicious. Who is this girl? At most, they would just praise her for being beautiful. The same situation applies to the CEO of Stark Pictures, who never appears in public. Most people are more interested in the scandals and gossip of big stars. Those behind-the-scenes producers must have masterpieces or be at the level of the big 8 film companies. In this era, not many people care about a small Hollywood company like Stark Pictures. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338, Poisonous Tentacles. For Sony, the final tactic was to attack from a technical perspective. Besides ramping up R&D efforts, a more direct approach was to poach key technical personnel from competitors. Ideally, they could bring along some key technical content, and even better, technology currently under research but not yet patented. After exhaustive investigation, everyone was forced to acknowledge one thing: the person leading the digitalization of Stark Pictures wasn't Tony Stark, as everyone initially suspected, but the seemingly indifferent Henry Brown. Consequently, invitations to dinners for the Stark Pictures CEO gradually increased. Private headhunters were also numerous. Henry initially managed to deal with the latter. However, these headhunters' invitations became a waste of Henry's time, becoming so numerous that his patience ran out. Henry simply declined them. Or perhaps, because he had rashly agreed to meet with these individuals, they mistakenly believed they had an opportunity to persuade him. As Henry gradually adapted to the dynamics of different social circles, he gradually adjusted his attitude and approach. As for the parties he'd been invited to, they were unlike the networking-focused ones J.J. Harris had arranged for Charlize Theron. The Hollywood human flesh feast was beginning to unfold before Henry, a newcomer. The initial events weren't going to be finalized. They were merely some non-illegal activities, with at most some illegal drugs used to liven up the atmosphere. The young men and women, paraded and bid for like live pigs before being slaughtered, were oblivious to their fate and were simply flaunting their youth. The host even explicitly hinted that it didn't matter how they played, they'd be there to cover the bottom line. If it weren't for his promise to Tony Stark that he'd help him keep an eye on these scandals and keep a record of the perpetrators, Henry wouldn't have wanted to attend such a party. Don't assume that anyone invited to such a place can let loose without any scruples. Henry, relying on his supersensory senses, observed hidden cameras and audio recordings everywhere. Furthermore, judging by their precocious European and American appearance, Some of the boys and girls looked a bit off base. It's safe to say that such parties are full of traps. The hints, teasing, and deliberate scrapes are all temptations designed to plunge one into the abyss of hell. Henry had reason to believe that if someone got tricked here, it wasn't certain someone would come to negotiate for compensation the next day. Such dirty laundry would be kept secret until it became particularly valuable, at which point it would be used as leverage. Were all attendees unaware of this? Henry observed that it wasn't necessarily unknown. So, excluding the party staff and the girls who accompanied them, the attendees could be largely divided into three categories. The first was the truly clueless, uninformed youngsters who indulged in the fun, ultimately leaving others vulnerable. The second was those who knew what was going on but deliberately went along with it, essentially offering a token of their loyalty. The third was those who knew what kind of party it was but attended for various reasons, with no intention of leaving anybody vulnerable. The third category was typically older and more worldly wise. So, upon seeing the spectacle, they knew what was going on. Some, more cautious, simply regretted attending. After all, if this matter were to be exposed later, how would he explain his innocence as long as he was on the list? With no proof of his innocence, he'd be left to the imaginations of unscrupulous journalists. Henry was among those who regretted it, but he didn't show it on his face. He simply chatted with people in public, just like any other social gathering. If a girl asked him out to a more private place, Henry would coax her away, but he wouldn't foolishly follow her. Instead, he stayed and chatted with some Hollywood insiders, all kinds of dirty talk. His principle was to keep the conversation to himself and avoid unnecessary details. He'd previously dealt with the South Los Angeles gangs, who were adept at these kinds of tricks to frame people. And then there was the story of Lin Chong entering the White Tiger Hall with his sword and water margin. Was he just going to get himself into trouble by just hanging around with others? Another reason for his restraint was the disparity in status. The invited guests were all second and third tier, little-known directors and producers. There weren't any big-name directors or top-tier producers, and none of them were CEOs of film companies like him. He wasn't the guest of honor, nor was there any introduction. Simply being invited here, left to fend for himself among this group, was a form of disdain. In this situation, there was nothing wrong with simply leaving. A small number of people would ignore their own entertainment and come to discuss projects with Henry, the CEO of Stark Films. While Stark Films rarely engages in film production, it's still limited, not absent. Every year, there's still a certain amount of funding to support excellent independent films. This is a common understanding within the industry. So, some people would approach him, hoping for some support. Henry took advantage of these people, feigning popularity and busyness, using excuses to turn down the girls' advances. He also used these people to spread a secret. At Tony Stark's behest, Stark Films, under his leadership, actually had more money available for film production each year. If you had a good project, just come to him. This news intensified the enthusiasm of directors with scripts or projects. Even those with established studio partners were eager to approach Henry's Stark Films. Some riskier projects might be too daunting for just one or two studios to launch. With more investors, the risk could be shared, increasing the chances of a project getting off the ground. This was a boon for many. As the night wore on, some of the most enthusiastic left intoxicated. Some simply passed out, lying in bed with their playmates, unable to leave until the next day. Seeing their time was almost up, Henry was about to leave when a white man who looked like the host approached. He raised his glass of mild champagne and greeted, "Mr. Brown doesn't look particularly pleased with today's party," Henry said with a forced smile. "How could that be? I see so many producers, directors, and all those lovely women. They all approached me, one after another, making me feel like the sun being chased by the stars. For a young man like me, suddenly thrust into a high position, this is an unprecedented experience. Don't you see I'm feeling elated? If I come here a few more times, I think I'll get lost in this. Haha, it seems Mr. Brown is really dissatisfied with this level of banquet. My boss asked me to do this." Which was quite hasty. "Oh, your boss is, Mr. Mickey Schulhoff, President and CEO of Sony America. If it's Mr. Schulhoff, if he wants to see me, he can just find a bar and a bottle of whiskey. I dare not come to a banquet like this a second time. There's a chance. I hope to see you again next time I'm invited." The banquet host extended his hand politely. Henry returned the handshake and said conservatively, "There's a chance," then he left. Chapter 339 Irresistible Invitation. Charlize Theron finally escaped the endless audition hell and landed a role. Her first significant role in this world, a supporting role with lines, was as the protagonist's ex-girlfriend and dentist. The film was called That Thing You Do. She chose this film because it was a musical comedy written, directed, and starred by Tom Hanks, who had just won the Oscar for Best Actor in 1993 and 1994. As a prominent member of Hollywood's Jewish community, his commercial performance wasn't as down-to-earth as his role in Forrest Gump, and his actions weren't overly sinister. He was undoubtedly a figure worth getting to know. Besides this film, she was offered roles in several other films, all scheduled. However, they were all supporting roles of varying importance, some with only a few lines, and she didn't land a starring role. According to J.J. Harris, in the first year of her acting career, she just needed to make herself known as much as possible. Not everyone is destined for instant stardom. Supporting roles are just the right size. They don't have to carry the box office like the lead. If a film underperforms at the box office and the lead actress is an unproven newcomer, it could be a serious blow to Charlize Theron's future. While she has Henry as the CEO of Stark Films as a backup, Charlize Theron doesn't have much leverage to fail. Therefore, J.J. Harris advises a steady approach. She should first secure supporting roles to earn a living, thus escaping the hell of working part-time jobs. In J.J. Harris's eyes, Charlize's part-time job to make ends meet is the most shameful waste of her life. In the process of securing roles, J.J. Harris occasionally used Stark Films' name as leverage, and Henry was cooperative, assisting Charlize in securing them. Of course, there's inevitably some exchange of investment and profit, but business is business, and Stark Films isn't just throwing money around for a role. With J.J. Harris, a seasoned producer, both Henry and Charlize can find the right terms for the deal, rather than being the unjustly taken advantage of. However, Mickey Schulhoff, who had once dug a hole for Henry, hadn't been contacted since that unsuccessful attempt. That was until a piece of news arrived. Sony Japan held a shareholder meeting, officially assuming the role of president of Sony Corporation, Nobuyuki Idai, while former president Norio Oga continued to serve as the company's top executive. Thus, Sony entered a two-horse race. Mickey Schulhoff, president and CEO of subsidiary Sony America, had been a contender for the succession. His failure to win the election brought him a sense of crisis. John Peters and Peter Guber, who also ran Sony Pictures Entertainment, SPE, had been fired by the new president. Now, Sony Pictures Entertainment has no one in charge, and lawyers have been appointed by the Japanese to clean up the mess left by the two men, well, what the Japanese call it. In fact, in the eyes of Hollywood, the two men had indeed ripped the Japanese off. Mickey Schulhoff survived his dismissal thanks to Oga's complete trust. Even if he didn't aim for the CEO position, he had to find a way to establish his credentials and stay. Thus, Henry Brown's mastery of digital imaging technology once again surfaced before the drowning man's eyes. Ever since that treacherous banquet, Henry, while abiding by his agreement with Tony Stark, had incompletely rejected similar invitations. He still kept his eye on those types of banquets and those types of people. However, Henry still declined invitations that didn't match his status. This wasn't to elevate his status, but to make those people understand the proper place in the world. For some self-righteous individuals, associating with those who mingled with the lower classes was a demeaning act. Therefore, their invitations to Henry were both humiliating and a test. Dealing with such people meant a lot of rules. There was no way around it. However, not all invitations were within the control of that group, and Henry didn't really care. He simply attended banquets that suited his status or whose invitees were considered his equals. Henry had learned a lot from attending so many fundraising events with Audrey Hepburn, meeting so many nouveau-riche, wealthy individuals, and genuine old money. Entering a circle isn't about money, power, or designer clothes. It's about being recognized by those within, and that's the hardest thing to achieve. For Henry, this was just another act. To carry on this act, he needed to demonstrate his acting prowess and put on a brilliant facade. Most importantly, he needed patience. So, Mickey Schulhoff took the bait. While it's unclear if he was one of those people, Oga Norio's trust in Mickey Schulhoff wasn't unlimited compared to Henry, who had more time to waste. The pressure on Nobuyuki Idai was mounting. To maintain his position, he sent Henry an invitation. The venue is a private club, not the usual Hollywood format of renting a villa or hosting an event at a celebrity's home. American private clubs are essentially a kind of social circle, advertised as strictly invitation only. Even if a member paid dues, he couldn't invite anyone into the club just because they wanted to. They had to meet the qualifications first. In serious cases, the inviter's membership could be revoked, or even declared missing. However, some clubs offer less stringent rules, depending on how much money one spends and the corresponding benefits. Basically, you get what you put in. Without commensurate rewards, who would be willing to follow so many rules? Henry didn't drive his old Cadillac, he was driven to and from the club by a member of the club. If he had insisted on coming alone, he wouldn't even be able to get through the parking lot after seeing the old car. Just like some restaurants have dress codes, those who wear cheap clothes and drive a junky car should be prepared to be ruthlessly rejected by the club. The aristocratic spirit of the rich prevents them from being proud of walking around in baggy shorts. Even when they're starving, they still maintain respectability, a lasting stubbornness inherited from these old white men, a legacy of British tradition. Wanting to pretend he could fit in, Henry certainly didn't challenge their habits. He wore a navy blue Armani suit, his only luxury item. He didn't own a watch, so he simply didn't wear one. While this might seem shabby to some, it wasn't impolite. Inside the club, the marble floors and walls were polished to a gleaming shine. You'd have thought you'd entered a mirror maze at an amusement park. Aside from the clatter of footsteps, there was no other sound. The waiter leading the way was reserved and silent, as if trained by a British butler. Chapter 340 Mitschulhof. The room Henry entered was a small room with its own bar. The sofa area was empty, but there was a figure in a suit at the bar. The bartender was a woman with a ponytail, her white shirt highlighting her impressive figure. When Henry entered, she was shaking a shaker with a flourish. With a few tugs, she poured the drink into a tall glass. The liquid was clear and colorless, spiced with citrus peel. Henry smelled it, and it was a vodka martini, a blend of vodka, gin, and vermouth. A classic, old-fashioned cocktail. The man in a suit at the bar picked up the drink, turned around, and raised it in a gesture of respect. "Henry, nice to meet you at last. I'm Mitschulhof." The waiter who had led the way had already closed the door and left. Generally speaking, in Western etiquette, two strangers are introduced by an intermediary. If there's no intermediary, etiquette dictates that the host come out to greet them. If there's a difference in status, at least a servant would come forward. But there were no extra people here, and who greeted whom instantly revealed the host and guest's superiority. Mickey Schulhoff, the host, had taken the opportunity to remain at the bar, serving drinks. This forced Henry to approach if he wanted to greet him. This elderly white man, with Slavic features, was slightly oversized, but not overly plump. His thick hair was a plus for his age. But his expression was serious, his eyes menacing. If appearance reflects the heart, he looked like he was going through a rough patch, perhaps even harboring ulterior motives. Henry didn't immediately respond to the greeting, but instead approached the bar. His eyes fixed on the bartender's prominent position, tapping lightly on the table. "Girl, it's hot out there, and I'm dying of thirst. Give me a surprise," Henry stated, leaving the bartender free to act. By then, he was beside Mickey Schulhoff. Extending his hand, Henry greeted, "Henry Brown. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Schulhoff." Uncertainly, Henry extended his right hand for a handshake, but Mitch Schulhoff's right hand was holding a wine glass. This left Schulhoff awkwardly unsure whether to raise or lower his glass. If he had been able to smoothly lower it and shake hands, Henry would have been the one being disrespectful. But Mitch Schulhoff paused, giving Henry a chance. As Henry put down his glass and extended his hand to shake, Henry again made an embarrassed expression and offered his left hand. This time, Mitch Schulhoff was embarrassed twice. Henry was being disrespectful, but he had lost his composure, revealing a less than perfect side of himself. When he angrily switched to his left hand for a handshake, Henry refused to switch hands. The two finally shook hands. The first round of the fight was a matter of opinion, but Mitch Schulhoff knew he hadn't achieved the desired result. Suppressing his displeasure, Mitch Schulhoff asked, "Henry, did you see Bad Boys?" Seeing the smug expression on the old white man's face, Henry couldn't help but admit it. This black film, directed by Michael Bay and starring Martin Lawrence and Will Smith, was indeed one of the few commercially successful projects since Sony acquired Columbia Pictures. With a budget of $19 million, it grossed $141 million. Henry replied frankly, "Yes, I did. It's one of the rare good films Columbia Pictures has produced recently. Ignore the critics' harsh words. Commercial success is success, ignoring the implicit sarcasm. Mitch Schulhoff said cheerfully, I like what you said. Movies should be big budgets to be box office hits. It's a shame John and Peter, those two short-sighted and incompetent guys, are so focused on making money that they never consider making a good movie. Now that they've both been fired, are you interested in taking over SPI? This sudden move caught Henry off guard. The bartender had just placed a freshly mixed drink before him, and just as he was about to take a sip, he paused. He then raised the beer-based cocktail and took a sip. Mitch Schulhoff certainly didn't miss this subtle shift. With a smile on his face, he continued, Sony Pictures Entertainment, SPI, which manages Columbia Pictures, is no match for a washed-up company like Stark Pictures. Whether you have film ambitions or want to make your girlfriend famous, don't you think this is a better platform for you? Stark Pictures, which produces less than one film a year, what can they possibly accomplish? Walter White's words were true. While Stark Pictures had considerable advantages in equipment, the gap compared to the established Big 8 Hollywood studios of the era was far from trivial. At the very least, Stark Pictures couldn't use its equipment to compete with any of the Big 8. Because Stark Films isn't the only manufacturer of photography equipment. Moreover, the Big 8 studios all have their own, fully equipped studios, so they don't need to rent from Stark Films. Independent films and smaller production companies rely on leasing to reduce equipment costs. If this weren't the Marvel Universe, the offer from the old white man would be quite tempting. But even without considering Tony Stark's financial connections, Henry didn't think the old white man was a good choice. Mr. Schulhoff, I heard there's no one in charge of SPI right now. But can you designate one? As long as you demonstrate value, how could the Japanese refuse? The digital camera you're developing right now is only HD capable. UHD is still in development. I bet you can't imagine how desperate Sony is for this technology. If they want it, I'll give it to them, Henry smiled. Of course, this doesn't mean you're handing over your technology to the Japanese. What I want is more leverage, so I can eventually take control of Sony headquarters. To do that, I need your help, Henry, but hasn't the chairmanship of Sony been handed over to Nobuyuki Aizu? No, Norio Oga is still in charge. Nobuyuki Aizu only holds the title of president. Vice presidents can still be replaced. And you don't think my goal is just to become Sony's president, do you? If I don't want to be president, Mr. Schulhoff, you're not after all Sony, are you? Mickey Schulhoff's eyes flashed with enthusiasm. That's right. Don't you think it's our duty to teach those Japanese who threaten to buy America a lesson? Think of their faces when Sony is no longer Sony of Japan, but Sony of America. As an American, wouldn't you be happy? I said the same thing. If this wasn't the Marvel Universe, Henry might have agreed. But he was using other people's chips to make his own profits. Although he gave some small rewards, he still relied on empty promises to convince people. Henry had long been trained to be immune to this kind of empty promise pooh. So at this time, he just laughed twice. Chapter 341 Blockbuster Under Attack. Henry's meeting with Mitch Schulhoff ended on bad terms. Not even a vague offer of hope left any room for discussion. Henry flatly rejected this old white man's delusional attempt to seize Japanese assets. Even without relying on his pre-existing memories, and regardless of whether this was the Marvel Universe, Henry could tell from the economic and industrial news in both the US and Japan that the conflict between Sony Japan headquarters and Sony America was practically a foregone conclusion. Besides the blind trust of former Sony president and now Emperor Norio Oga in Mitch Schulhoff, Sony's top brass had long been dissatisfied with Sony America's feudal lord-like attitude, acting independently, regardless of the king's headquarters orders. Especially now, Mitch Schulhoff's fate was becoming a battleground between former President Norio Oga and current President Nobuyuki Idai. If Nobuyuki Idai had risen to power through rebellion, he would have faced a fierce battle with the former president, Norio Oga. But Nobuyuki Idai was also someone Norio Oga had promoted himself. Would Oga Norio fight his chosen successor just to inflict over $3 billion in losses on Sony? Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Mickey Schulhoff would be abandoned sooner or later. It was just a matter of how. Why would Henry jump on a sinking ship? Just to turn Sony Japan into the pie in the sky of Sony America? Even with the current economic bubble bursting, Japan couldn't stand by and watch a giant like Sony be snatched away by the Americans. If that were to happen, they would inevitably intervene. After documenting Mickey Schulhoff's wishful thinking in a regular report and sending it to Tony Stark's confidential email address, Henry no longer cared about the matter. Of course, whether the young master read the report or not was none of his business. He had fulfilled his obligation to report. In Hollywood circles, Sony Pictures Entertainment was now a junior figure. Aside from its wealth, it was looked down upon in every other respect. Therefore, Henry wasn't afraid of pressure from Sony, and no one would respond to Sony's call. Everyone was focused on how to use Japanese money to run their own affairs. Forget about the rest. Henry, returning to normal life, still hovered on the periphery of a certain circle, neither ready to enter nor to enter. His daily routine consisted of work at Stark Films and spending time with his girlfriend during breaks from filming. However, Charlize Theron, whose career was starting to pick up, saw a stark difference. Sometimes, evening acting practice would be replaced with script readings, with Henry helping her figure out how to play a character. Charlize would first pitch her ideas, and then Henry would add to them. These scripts weren't necessarily the roles she'd been offered, some might simply be parts of auditions. But Charlize would still spend time thinking about how to act. While their time together was largely dominated by work, whenever they could see each other, they certainly had some intimate time. Charlize seemed to prefer this kind of relationship, rather than letting herself get swept up in the entanglement of love and become lost in it. While acting practice was much less frequent than before, Henry still went to the movies. He went to the cinema and rented videos to watch later. That wasn't to say he didn't read comics. It was the kind of paper with pages that flipped. When he was alone, he'd involuntarily use super speed to read through it in seconds. In contrast, a videotape these days would take an hour or two to play. Unlike digital images, which can be replayed multiple times without distortion, fast-forwarding a videotape obscured the image's image, rendering it impossible to discern anything. So it was a productive way to waste time, a precious commodity for a Kryptonian with super speed. Don't ask why he didn't do some research when he had the time. If he wanted to do research, he had to have a goal. Could he really reach the stars? That wasn't something that could be solved by simply flying off into space. He watched at least one movie a day, cuddled his girlfriend whenever she was around, and spent the rest of his time doing some research. This was Henry's daily routine lately. Before work, he'd usually return his nearly expired videotapes at Blockbuster. That allowed him to grab a different breakfast on the way. Henry felt like he'd be living this decadent life forever, with no worries about money, girls to cuddle with, and the freedom to slack off at work. But today, Blockbuster, had it been attacked by terrorists? A lone police car was parked outside, alongside vehicles belonging to local security personnel. One of the Blockbuster's floor-to-ceiling windows was shattered, and the arriving police had hastily put up some cordon tape to prevent anyone from entering. Henry walked over and peeked inside. The interior looked like it had been attacked by a trebuchet. A large hole had been torn in the ceiling, and things inside were also smashed. In front of the shattered window was a damaged sign. It was from True Lies, one of the hit movies of 1994, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. However, most of the male lead's image had been destroyed, leaving only the portrait of Jamie Lee Curtis and the recognizable film title on the lower half. "Hey, what are you doing?" the police officer behind him shouted. Henry quickly raised his bag. "I'm here to return the videotape, sir. Today is the deadline. It looks like they can still operate," knowing that it was serious business and that the people were standing outside the cordon and not trying to break in. The police didn't say anything. Instead, the fat security guard in charge of this area said, "Just put the videotape in the 24-hour return box. The police have already collected evidence this morning. Now we just have to wait for the Blockbuster people to come to work, clean up the environment, and restore it to its original state. When the people come, they will deal with the returned videotapes in the same way." Seeing the fat security guard coming, Henry asked while sorting the videotapes, "What happened? There's a huge hole in the ceiling. Could it be a meteorite? If a meteorite of that size had fallen, the entire Blockbuster would have been blown up. It wouldn't have just smashed some video racks. Could it be some mutants fighting here?" The portly security guard, seemingly unable to contain himself, blurted out, "No, I've also told the FBI. It was a woman in a green bodysuit who fell from the sky. The windows were damaged by a laser. The woman also went to the nearby Radio Shack and looted communications equipment. I don't know what she took. We'll have to wait for the Radio Shack employees to count it themselves. If you had come earlier, You might have seen her. But another fight broke out, and she ran after someone, and the FBI ran after her. Then there was no one here anymore. Oh, that's not right. Some unlucky guy got left behind. He's young, but his hairline has receded quite a bit, and his forehead is very bald. He was just picked up not long ago. Chapter 342, The Skrulls Appear. After finishing his words in one breath, the fat security guard suddenly added, "Do you believe it? In the world before the time travel, Henry wouldn't have believed anything the fat security guard said, because what he said was simply too unbelievable. A woman falling from the sky? This wasn't City Hunter, where brides would fall from the sky. But this was the Marvel Universe, and it was hard not to think of a certain woman. The origin movie of Captain Marvel, Marvel's officially certified strongest character. Actually, those movies were so distant that Henry didn't usually pay much attention to them. But with his super brain's memory, with just a hint of something, he could quickly follow the clues and recall everything. However, movie plots couldn't be relied upon for prior knowledge. Even the slightest difference in the development could easily lead to a completely different outcome. Furthermore, a 2-hour movie couldn't possibly reveal every detail. So, Henry, determined not to get involved this time, decided to ignore the matter. He wasn't expecting another Mystique to appear and drag him out on a mission to fight a bunch of incomprehensible aliens. I always feel like I've raised the flag. The more I say no, the more it will happen. Well, I didn't feel that way before I said it. The more I talk about it, the more it feels wrong. Henry quickly shook his head, as if to shake off bad luck. But seeing the fat security guard's attitude of wanting to talk to someone, Henry couldn't ignore him. Believe it, of course I shouldn't. Mutants have already messed up the world enough, so if there's more bizarre things, what's so surprising about that? Yet. But then those people just laughed at me, saying that kind of thing was impossible. Henry lowered his voice pretentiously. Have you ever considered that maybe they're just saying that to shut you up? The security guard followed Henry's lead and whispered, I think so too. So, what do you think I should do? Sell the news to a tabloid reporter and get some beer money? What else do you want to do? Do you think you can kill the predator in the jungle like Arnold did and take his high-tech equipment? I think the chances of being killed by a self-explosion are higher. That's true. The pot-bellied security guard patted his belly, his eyes no longer as fiery as they had been at the beginning. Henry clapped his hands after putting the organized videotapes back into the return box. Done. Let's go. How long are you going to have to wait? The portly security guard said. I don't know. Logically, after I reported what's going on here, the company should have notified Blockbuster and Smart. Someone from them should have shown up a long time ago, but no one has shown up yet. I don't know what's going on. Okay, I have to get to work. I'm leaving now, okay? The two casual acquaintances didn't say goodbye or anything like that. They nodded and parted ways. As Henry returned the tape and chatted with a portly security guard, a group of people gathered on a distant rooftop. Their attire varied, ranging from blue-collar to white-collar, from men to women, young and old. Henry was wary of such a gathering. If they were the FBI or LAPD, and if they were targeting him, he'd start looking for an escape route. The trick was simple, simply disappear from their sight for a short while, avoiding being caught by surveillance cameras, and then immediately use super speed or flight to escape. With this trick, no one had yet been able to stop him. Henry had diligently practiced Batman's true vanishing technique. It had already been 2 times that Henry had been inexplicably stopped by the FBI and taken to inexplicable places. Even if he was a fool, he knew this shouldn't happen a 3rd time. It would be really annoying for a Kryptonian to be constantly stopped by these official organizations, taunted and sent away with nothing more than a hat. So whenever he felt he was being targeted, Henry would plan his escape route. The moment they made a move, he'd disappear. Unless Quicksilver was sent after them. But it was said that this guy had left the X-Men and wasn't staying at the school for gifted youngsters. X-Men members came and went, with only a few remaining members. Joining and leaving wasn't surprising. But the group in the distance didn't seem to want to do anything to him, they were just chatting together. Henry stopped paying attention to them. Little did he know, the target of their conversation was him. In other words, they were surprised to discover a life-bearing planet on C-53 in the Kree Empire star map sequence, and they saw an alien life form that shouldn't be native to this planet, a Kryptonian. Are you sure that creature, who looks just like a native, is a Kryptonian cockroach? A Skrull said seriously. Kryptonians possess a DNA lock. They are one of the very few life forms in the universe that we can't completely replicate or transform, making them impossible to mistake. My ability can only replicate their appearance. Any further would result in rejection. Of course, even DNA is impossible to match. Yes, I can confirm that creature is a Kryptonian cockroach. Although we haven't encountered Kryptonians in a long time in our history, their description of their rejection of our shape-shifting abilities is exactly what I encountered. This is proof. This group of people are the Skrulls, a highly technologically advanced alien race that accidentally landed on Earth. Their racial innate ability is the ability to transform into any living or non-living form they encounter, and to acquire temporary memories. Because of their gifts, the Skrulls harbor an innate resentment towards races with similar abilities, or those that could counteract them. For example, the Debiri, who approached Earth 3 years ago to seize the Phoenix Force, are a species capable of mimicking other life forms, though not down to the DNA level. However, thanks to their abilities, the Debiri have repeatedly faced attacks from the Skrull Empire across the universe. Their homeworld lies within the Sheer Empire, saving them from extermination. Krypton, in this universe, also seems to have some connection with the Skrulls. The way the Skrulls address each other suggests a less than friendly relationship. Henry, who wasn't paying close attention to the situation, had no way of knowing all this. Even if he had noticed, he wouldn't have been able to decipher the Skrull language he'd heard for the first time. While Henry, aided by his super brain, has learned many languages, he hasn't learned all of them, let alone the regional dialects. So, even if he had noticed the strange conversation, he probably wouldn't have taken it seriously. Chapter 343, Work at Stark Films. Henry's indifference didn't stop the Skrulls from focusing on the Kryptonian. One of them asked, "So how do we deal with this Kryptonian cockroach? This isn't a system with green stars. And we don't have the conditions to terraform stars right now." Well, who among you still remembers the characteristics of Kryptonians? I only remember that they become very weak under red stars, and extremely weak under green stars. Who would even remember our defeat 9,000 years ago? I only remember their performance under red and green stars. Red stars are the star type of the Kryptonian system, while the green star Barrington system was the battlefield where the Skrull Empire triumphed over the Kryptonian fleet. So what will happen to Kryptonians under yellow stars? All the Skrulls looked up at the sunlight. Unfortunately, human pupils and optic nerves cannot withstand the brightness of sunlight. Their eyes couldn't handle the stimulation, tears welled up, and they fell into temporary black blindness. Well, they were soldiers, which meant they were all poor students. Who still remembered the detailed history of the Skrull Empire? Their teacher would be relieved to know about the Kryptonians. It seems we have no choice but to contact General Talus and ask him what he plans to do. Hopefully, this Kryptonian cockroach won't hinder our plans. These Skrulls were aboard the same warship. Unfortunately, their ship was damaged by the Kree's elite interstellar forces, forcing the soldiers aboard to make an emergency landing in escape pods on the planet codenamed C-53. General Talus was the leader of this group of Skrulls. So, when faced with a dilemma, they naturally thought of him. However, after landing on Earth, most of them lost contact. Following their code of conduct, they immediately transformed into the appearances of the planet's natives to avoid detection by the local government. Especially since their normal forms differed significantly, disguise had always been a priority for the Skrulls. Now, they had to find a way to reconnect. However, the idea of contacting their leader was not universally accepted. As the most ambitious Skrull, Irving said, Krypton is ostracized by the entire universe, with even its home planet sealed off by the Phantom Zone, preventing anyone from leaving and those outside from entering. There must be a reason for this. General Talus has his own goals to pursue. Shouldn't we share his burden and deal with this Kryptonian? We don't know how this Kryptonian broke through the blockade and reached planet C-53, nor do we know his motives. What if he's colluding with the Kree? What if he's hindering General Talus's actions? Even if we can't eliminate him, at least we have to prevent him from causing us any trouble. The Skrulls present looked at each other in confusion. One asked, "Irving, what are you going to do? Are you going to assassinate him?" "No, let's do what we do best. Infiltrate this planet's indigenous government and have them help us eliminate the Kryptonian. We just need to find a way to sow discord between the two sides. The key to our operation should be concealment." Every Skrull nodded in agreement with Irving's suggestion. Espionage and infiltration are essential skills for nearly every adult Skrull. Sowing discord is their specialty. Although this was their first time on this backward planet, They quickly figured out the best ways to frame individuals within this indigenous society, drawing on stolen appearances and short-term memories. Each person found a suitable persona and entry point. If their current identity wasn't suitable, they would steal another. This was routine for the Skrulls, and everyone carried out this operation with expert skill. Of course, a targeted man wouldn't have known they were being manipulated before even making contact. Henry went to work as usual. His first task, of course, was to monitor the maintenance and upgrade progress of a series of film post-production software. Then, he worked on the research progress of the UHD codec. Because much of the software was jointly developed, Henry installed Git, a distributed version control system developed and versioned on a server within the local network. This way, he didn't have to visit every department in person. Instead, he could simply check its update progress and get a general overview of the software's status. A Gantt chart indicated everyone's ideal progress. If someone fell short, they could simply check in. While CVS, a system already available for collaboration and licensed under the new general public license, had its limitations and flaws, Henry simply opted for the more user-friendly Git. Furthermore, since the network functionality was built using the Hollywood Boys supercomputer and servers, Git naturally caught Tony Stark's eye and was readily available for internal use within Stark Industries. Henry's terms were simple: use new, and he would provide ongoing maintenance, free to use. Tony Stark, of course, had no objection. After all, only the public version would be released. Internal upgrades, including encryption and enhanced network security measures, were a private matter. This is the case with many new licensed software. Anyone with the ability to modify it would adapt it to their specific needs. As long as it wasn't commercially available, it was within the scope of the license. Whether the modified version could be made public depended on the circumstances. Stark Industries' use of the supercomputer involved company secrets and programs under development, so they wouldn't foolishly expose them, allowing those with ulterior motives to exploit them. Besides these official tasks, Henry inevitably borrowed a supercomputer's resources for personal work, primarily developing his own EDA and simulation software. With chip manufacturing processes reaching the nanometer level, Henry's traditional methods, superbrain thinking, coordinating all his senses, and using tools to manually manipulate chips, were highly prone to error. At such a small process, a single mistake could render the entire chip useless, forcing him to start all over again. To mitigate this, designing and running simulations first to see what would happen was less frustrating than simply manually manipulating and failing. Meanwhile, Henry began exploring topological core architectures, moving toward quantum computing. This approach avoided the reliance on blindly improving traditional manufacturing processes simply to speed up the computer's instruction cycle. Without Tony Stark's enthusiastic sponsorship of supercomputers, relying solely on his own homemade tools, it was unclear how long it would take for these research projects to reach fruition. As someone with high-level permissions, capable of secretly assuming administrator privileges when necessary, Henry was perfectly capable of carrying out his duties without being noticed. Only when Tony came to the West Coast did Henry exercise some restraint in his use of the supercomputer. Whether or not the young master discovered his activities was of little concern to Henry. Just as Henry would try to hack into Tony Stark's virtual host to see if there was any intriguing technology within. Another less important task was for the production department to place screened projects or scripts on Henry's desk for him to choose from. This was accompanied by the production department's evaluation, promotional methods, and projected profits. Chapter 344: Uninvited Guests at Home. The reason the production department's work wasn't important was because it didn't come up every day. Furthermore, it wasn't a priority for Stark Films, so naturally, there was no rush. A week's worth of proposals had piled up, and there weren't many on his desk. Henry should have finished them all today, but the baby left at home started blaring a high-pitched alarm, signaling the arrival of a very important, unexpected guest. Though secretly pleased, Henry still put on a stern face, feigned reluctance, and left work early after saying goodbye to the secretary in the small office. Incidentally, the plump, black woman who had introduced Henry to Stark Films when he first arrived, Julian Williams, was now the CEO's secretary. However, she primarily handled menial tasks like answering phones, scheduling appointments, and taking messages. She was nothing like the kind of secretary who wielded influence over the boss. Henry didn't need help sorting through documents and reports. Not feeling the family situation was urgent enough to require super speed, so he drove home. As he drove, Henry wondered what he had gotten himself into recently. Otherwise, why would that chick come back? She ignored Katie's threats and barged right into the house. Since it wasn't rush hour, Henry drove home at a leisurely pace. It didn't take long to get back to his rental. It was late autumn, and the afternoon sun had already passed its peak. So, old Gary didn't stand guard on the street, but retreated to his house. While California's autumn temperatures hadn't yet reached winter's lows, without the warmth of the sun and the chill of the wind, it was easy to catch a cold. It was old Gary's absence that allowed the outsider to slip into the building so easily. Or perhaps it was because of a supposed report that, even if old Gary saw them, he'd just pretend to be blind and let them go. Whatever the possibility, Henry returned to his house and opened the door. Katie was crouching over an unconscious woman. He wondered if the tiger was struggling, and if the thing before him was even a snack. The woman in the business suit was none other than Barbara Morse, with whom he had severed ties in the middle of last year. Agent 19 of SHIELD, later nicknamed Mockingbird. She collapsed in her own home because of injuries all over her body, and she was sweating profusely, clearly exhausted. Was she being hunted? Was she being thrown back onto the street? After a brief inner struggle, Henry sighed deeply and relented. After all, they knew each other, and perhaps there was a purpose behind their interactions. At least the other party showed no ill will. Henry carried her to the sofa, pulled out his first aid kit, and began treating Barbara's injuries. With over a year of experience as a shady doctor, Henry naturally ignored minor, non-fatal injuries of this magnitude. He didn't even need to strip her naked, he tended to the still bleeding wounds. The bullet lodged in her body was removed, rather than kept as a souvenir. He applied stitches where necessary and bandages where necessary. Large wounds left unsutured would likely leave scars as they healed naturally. He didn't know how the girl felt about her scars, but Henry took the initiative to treat them. Then he wiped the bloodstains wherever they could be removed, leaving the more difficult parts alone. Henry had no intention of taking advantage of the situation. Taking advantage of a female agent, in particular, would be like handing someone a handicap. Barbara's injuries weren't serious, after all. As Henry wiped the dirt from her face, the cool towel had already woken her. The girl opened her eyes and saw a tiger head licking its lips. Walter, frightened, Barbara leaped to her feet, retreating as far as she could. Inwardly, she wondered if the cold sensation just now was the tiger's prelude to nibbling on her head. Henry pushed the tiger head away just in time, bringing himself into the girl's field of vision. Perhaps the scene was too shocking, and the situation felt so logical, that it took Barbara, newly awakened, a moment to process the situation. She looked at Henry, then at the tiger. Barbara finally managed a wry, helpless smile and said, "Hello, Katie." "Hello, Henry." Henry's expression was kind, but not particularly welcoming. "Girl, what's wrong with you? How did you get shot so many times? You went to a place a good girl shouldn't be, and a bunch of old men hated you and shot you." Her sanity returning, Barbara grabbed Henry's collar and nervously said, "Run. Someone's trying to kill you." "Uh-oh, calm down. Take a deep breath and talk slowly. First, who wants to kill me? And how did you know? Is it related to your injuries?" Perhaps it was her excessive excitement, and her excessive movements had pulled on the wound, causing Barbara to press on her abdomen, where the injury was most severe. Following Henry's instructions, she took a deep breath and took another look at herself. Henry then said, "I've taken care of your injuries. If you're worried, go to the hospital and get a tetanus shot. It's SHIELD, the organization I was planning to join. I'm still an intern, and I received an emergency call from my superiors. They instructed us to form a strike team, and our target is you, Henry Brown. Shoot to death, and leave no one alive." "Shoot to death?" Henry looked puzzled. "Yes, shoot to death," Barbara said in a positive tone. But by the end, she realized something was amiss. Henry asked, "I'm not familiar with your agency. I just want to ask, do they have data on me? Why are they targeting me? I saw your data from another officer. My level 1 clearance doesn't allow me to see that. As for the reason for the attack on you, the one who ordered it didn't say. He just said you were a vicious criminal, and we should show no mercy." This reek of conspiracy almost made Henry suffocate. Could SHIELD not have data on its own invulnerability? So what were they relying on to shoot me? Mutant killing equipment? Or, simply offering to kill me? Do you have any special equipment prepared for your attack? Barbara shook her head, a serious expression on her face. It seemed she was thinking the same thing as Henry. In the eyes of SHIELD's higher-ups, Henry Brown's mutant abilities weren't considered highly classified. But the commandos hadn't made the necessary preparations. What was going on? What about you? How could you possibly be shot by your own men? Barbara blushed, unable to understand why she had so impulsively questioned the agency's directives. She awkwardly twisted her index fingers and said uneasily, I said I was just an intern and hadn't passed the field test, so I wasn't suitable to join the commandos. And the reasoning behind the order was too vague, simply emphasizing that you were evil without any concrete evidence. So I refused to accept such an order and wanted to consult with other superiors to review this strange order, but before I could find them, I was shot in the back. Then I managed to escape. Henry looked at the girl with a strange expression. Is this the organization you want to join? What was your reason for joining? It couldn't be for justice and peace. Don't say it, I regret it now. I might as well go back to school and do academic research with a professor, Barbara said frustratedly, covering her face. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345 Raid and Escape. Wait a minute, aren't all the people called up here interns like you? Henry asked. Barbara replied, because the full-time agents have been taken away by the regional commander on other missions. So, the commander wants us trainees and some of the newly recruited first-class agents to assist. That doesn't seem right. Are there others questioning orders like you? Barbara shook her head. No. Everyone's excited for the opportunity to go out on a field mission. Most people think that with this experience, they'll have no problem transitioning to full-time agents. They haven't considered the consequences of failure. It seems Henry didn't have to doubt that the vans heading towards him, filled with teams in full SWAT gear, were coming to take him down. The point is, the gear they use would be a powerful deterrent against ordinary criminals. But coming to take him down without the specialized gear for dealing with mutants? That's just asking for trouble. Even though he wasn't a mutant himself. Was it SHIELD going after him? Or was it SHIELD? No matter who their opponent was, Henry couldn't imagine why they'd attack. If they really wanted to, they should have done it long ago. Why wait until he became the CEO of Stark Films? Or were they using him as a warning to Tony Stark? And yet, knowing they had his own information, they sent a bunch of ill-equipped rookies. This reeked of conspiracy. Henry, Barbara grabbed Henry's shirt again, bringing his thoughts back to reality. The girl said, they know about this place and could attack at any moment. We need to leave quickly. Do you have any weapons? She opened a cabinet, revealing a bow and several arrows. Henry thought for a moment, then chose a gun from the top shelf instead of his hunting gear. Holding the gun, he asked, Bobby, how's your shooting? Definitely better than mine. The instructor said I'm quite talented, Barbara said proudly. Well, you can use this gun then. Henry closed the cabinet door and handed it over. Barbara took it triumphantly at first. But as soon as she handled it, she felt something was wrong. She struggled with the holster in the magazine. The girl exclaimed in surprise, Is this an air gun? I only have this kind, for scaring people. The metal feels pretty good, right? I had it custom made. Henry found two earphone-like devices from another cabinet and attached them to Katie's ears. Since it wasn't her first time, Katie wasn't as repulsed by them. Still, she flapped her ears awkwardly, as if trying to shake the object off. Stunned, Barbara, holding the air gun, doubted her weapon. Unless it had a trained adult right in the eye, this thing wouldn't be enough to stop them, let alone kill them. Don't you have a real gun? Barbara asked bitterly. How could you possibly attack someone who almost became your colleague? Hearing Henry's question, Barbara angrily replied, They shot me first, but her anger faded as quickly as it had come. Barbara lowered her head, dejected. Those idiots, they must have been tricked. But I can't understand why our commander would target you. Was it really an order from the department? Or is there something wrong with him? I can't confront him directly, so forget it. Henry handed Barbara the women's suit jacket he had previously taken off. Put it on. We're getting ready to leave. At the same moment, Katie seemed to have heard something. She froze in place, her ears perked. Barbara, Oblivious to Katie's annoyance, casually set the airgun aside, took her own clothes, and put them on, not even bothering to take the toy with her. "Where are we going? Let's leave first." Henry grabbed Barbara's hand and walked towards his room. The girl was bewildered by the pull. Seeing she entered a room with a large bed, she felt both embarrassed and annoyed. Are they trying to take advantage of this moment? Is this the right time? Barbara's face flushed crimson with emotion, and she didn't notice Katie following her into Henry's room. Henry could hear the chaotic footsteps of a group rushing up the third floor. They were serious, pausing at every turn, following a strict CQB attack. They knew to remain silent, communicating only with hand gestures. But the deafening thud of footsteps was hard to ignore. Henry lifted the mattress and threw it out the large window. The shattering glass made a loud noise. Even the brave Barbara covered her ears, startled. "Are you jumping out? Wait. Jump. We're on the third floor," Barbara said in surprise, realizing she was being held by the waist. "So I threw the mattress out there to use as a cushion," Henry said matter-of-factly. "A small mattress, will it help?" "Better than nothing," Henry said with a smile. He pulled the girl closer to him, bringing them closer together. It wasn't that he was trying to take advantage of her. Rather, if she were to break free mid-air, he'd have to expose his abilities to save her, which wouldn't be worth it. Looking at the person in his arms, Henry smiled and said, "Let's go. Grit your teeth and don't bite your tongue." With a roar, Katie, as if understanding, followed Henry and leaped out the broken window. The two of them, the tiger, descended from the sky, landing precisely on the mattress Henry had thrown. In fact, just before landing, Henry had secretly used his flight ability to slow his descent. Since he was the first to land, Barbara didn't feel the full impact. For Katie, a large cat, this jump from the third floor wasn't a big deal. She landed smoothly on all fours, cushioned by the mattress, as if she jumped from the highest cat climbing frame in the house. Nothing happened. Henry's landing spot was carefully chosen. His old Cadillac was nearby. As soon as the door opened, he stuffed Barbara into the passenger seat. Then, with a whistle, he opened the back door and Katie jumped in. Just as he was about to get in the driver's seat, the men guarding the van on the street noticed them and shouted, "The target's escaping." The target's trying to drive away. Meanwhile, the slow-moving commandos were still battering the door with a battering ram. Henry's timing for his escape was perfectly timed to coincide with the group's tangle of attempts to escape. Chapter 346, The Shield's Pursuit. In those days, not everyone wore a headset. Only the team leader carried a walkie-talkie. Amidst the banging on the door, the anxious voice on the intercom was barely audible. When the battering ram finally broke the door open, a group of men rushed in. "FBI, everyone, hold still," nearly everyone inside yelled, their voices more deadly than bullets. However, the team leader, standing at the very back, finally made out the voice on the intercom. "What? The target has escaped through the window." The team members who had entered the house and hadn't found the target reported the same thing. Report, no one seen. Judging by the unusually broken window, they likely escaped through that window, the team leader shouted. "Need you tell me? The guys below have reported they saw them driving away. Everyone, get back to the cars. We're chasing them. Move. Quick." "Should we keep someone to search?" "No need. Everyone, get back to the cars. Move." At the team leader's barked command, all the heavily armed agents scurried back to their vehicles at top speed. This situation naturally alarmed the landlord, old Gary. Cautiously ascending to the third floor, he was met by a large group of men wearing black hoods, helmets, and black military gear. How could this not frighten him? Fortunately, the large, prominent FBI logo on their upper arms and chests reminded him that this was an official operation, not a gangster operation. Seeing them preparing to evacuate, old Gary bravely stepped forward. "Sir, what's going on here?" Before he could utter another word, old Gary was pinned against the wall. Though not held at gunpoint, his captor practically poked his nose. "Quiet. This is an FBI operation. Civilians don't need to be questioned. Move aside, we're still pursuing the criminal." Without warning, the agent restraining old Gary left at the end of his group. Old Gary, leaning against the wall, eyes closed, afraid to look, finally pried open one eye and surveyed the corridor. He glanced around and saw other tenants peeking out, their gazes shimmering. No one was aware of what was happening. Old Gary checked each room one by one and finally spotted the last possible FBI target, the one where Henry Brown kept his tigers. This was the only room damaged by the battering ram. Old Gary bravely peered inside. It looked like the tabby cat, Katie, was gone. There wasn't much shelter inside the house to hide the massive carnivore. This was the best news, right? At least there was no need to worry about the tiger escaping onto the street. As the landlord, old Gary felt it was his responsibility to investigate. So, he entered the house he'd rented to Henry. The FBI hadn't caused much damage after their entry and had immediately left. So, aside from a mess of footprints, there was no other damage. Just as old Gary was thinking this, he entered the only room and saw a broken window and a large bed, only the frame remaining, without a mattress. Oh, shit, old Gary peered out the window. The mattress he'd provided was now lying on the street. Several people who had been blocking their way by car had gotten out of their cars and were standing in the street, cursing. Someone else tried to drag the mattress off the road. What kind of trouble has that kid Henry gotten himself into? Old Gary muttered worriedly. The man, now the landlord's worry, had managed to buy time and temporarily escape the pursuit of those who claimed to be the FBI but were actually SHIELD. But he wasn't at all relieved. Official manhunts were never so easy to escape. Even without movies, he remembered watching live helicopter broadcasts of police chasing criminals for dozens of kilometers, only to be intercepted or stopped after an accident, and the criminal apprehended. These SHIELD agents, disguised as FBI agents, made Henry unsure of the extent of their actions. The more powerful an organization, the more options they had, even disregarding losses. Not to mention the cover they wore. In contrast, the police operated with a certain method. They couldn't just do whatever they wanted. It was relatively predictable. So, Henry's first thought was to change cars. Although a stolen vehicle registered as stolen would be highly visible to the police, the owner wouldn't necessarily report it immediately. This window of opportunity was a window Henry could exploit. If he were still driving his old Cadillac, with its color and license plate in official records, it would be too obvious to the police. Having never committed a crime or experienced a police chase, Henry was honestly at a loss. His only clues were those crime movies and TV shows. However, Henry knew that such films and TV shows were often exaggerated or embellished, and couldn't be taken seriously. With no experience to draw upon and no desire to expose himself too much to Barbara Morse, the SHIELD agent, Henry desperately sought a solution. Pulling into an alley, Henry's skill allowed the massive Cadillac to practically scrape along the alley's walls and corners, pulling into a corner filled with debris. He opened the door and let Barbara and Katie out. Where is this place? Barbara asked. I don't know. I'm here to change cars. You have a spare car here? Given his experience at the Continental Hotel, did he have a spare car in a safe house? Barbara wondered. But Henry quickly replied, how could I possibly prepare anything like that? Let's just steal one from the street. Leading the man and the tiger, Henry walked from the other end of the alley onto the street. It was a remote neighborhood, sparsely populated, and the streets were quite dirty. Henry pulled at the door handles along the way, not trying many times. When he pulled up to a tattered old car, the door swung open. He immediately climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine with a manual ignition, which smoothly started the car. In 30 or 40 years, with the streets dominated by remote-controlled electric cars, this wouldn't be possible. As the car started, Henry called out, Bobby, get in, opening the back door and letting Katie in as well. Someone had already noticed them from a distance. However, with a large, obviously unusually sized cat nearby, no one dared to step forward to investigate. The characteristics of a lion and a tiger are so distinct that it's hard to mistake them. Henry certainly didn't need to run and explain anything. Besides, this wasn't the age of cell phones recording anything, so the two men and the tiger immediately sped away. Chapter 347 The Direction of Rescue. In the car, Barbara Morse, who was temporarily safe, asked in confusion, Henry, you are not afraid of them, are you? Why don't you fight back? Even if it's just to subdue them. Or are you only able to defend against pistol bullets, and assault rifles can hurt you? Henry explained, I only know that the more the enemy wants us to do something, the more we should not do it. You know my ability. Do you think they are here to die? If so, is it possible that this is the other party's purpose? Or do you think those people have all betrayed? They deserved to die. Barbara Morse felt that there was something wrong with the order itself. She knew more intelligence than others, so she made the decision to disobey orders and was abandoned. So where did this matter go wrong? Barbara asked, Where do you think the problem lies? I don't know either. Henry lied here. If it wasn't S.H.I.E.L.D. or S.H.I.E.L.D. that was at fault, then it was most likely the Skrulls who appeared with Captain Marvel. This group of aliens can arbitrarily disguise themselves as humans, and subverting from within is their specialty. It fits perfectly with what Barbara Morse said. From the situation of the Winter Soldier assassinating the old Stark couple, we can see that the Americans' criteria for judging the murderer will drift depending on the situation. Killing unregistered aliens is in vain, no matter how many people die. But since he moved against S.H.I.E.L.D.'s people, regardless of whether it was the Skrulls who were at fault, would these agents whose companions died unjustly ruin their normal lives? A more important question is, why did the Skrulls target themselves? Henry asked. Bobby, do you have anyone you can trust in your organization? Ask what the situation is now. Barbara in the co-pilot seat bit her fingernails. Can we still trust them now? The trainee agent, shot several times by her own men, though the bullets weren't fatal, was on the verge of a breakdown in confidence. Perhaps this was a good opportunity to win over Barbara Morse, but with her life on the run, Henry could only reassure her. He said, I don't know if the person you previously thought you could trust can still be trusted now. But remember, don't take what they say literally. Is their attitude the same as usual? Are their behavior patterns different? Is they treating you differently than usual, like an enemy or a foe? Are there any irregularities in their context or language? These things help us understand the situation and determine whether they were telling the truth or luring us into a trap. Not to mention those who feel they have the upper hand. Most are willing to rant endlessly about the strengths and weaknesses of both sides, hoping to drive their opponents into surrender and save them further trouble. What they say will reveal enough information to help us understand the underlying situation. To obtain this intelligence, you must first be willing to communicate with others, but Henry's admonition didn't reassure Barbara. Instead, she looked at the man who was speaking with a strange expression. Is this how you view me? No trust in anyone, Henry, not at all embarrassed, simply smiled and said, trust is a false proposition. If your actions are in my best interest or a future worth investing in, then it doesn't matter whether you tell the truth or not. If your actions are simply intended to harm me or cause irreparable damage, then it doesn't matter whether you tell the truth or not. I simply rationally judge a person's intentions and determine my behavior accordingly. And so-called trust, isn't it, something you do with the assumption that the other person won't hurt you? Or do I have to gladly accept a stab in the back just to show my trust and loyalty? Barbara pouted and grumbled softly. Okay, I can't argue with you, you annoying bastard. She pulled a cell phone from her coat. I'm going to call someone and ask about the situation. I hope they won't betray my trust. The outgoing call was quickly picked up. Barbara had just said, Fury, when an exasperated voice came from the phone. Bobby, water fake. I just ran into trouble, and when I came back I heard that you were in trouble too. You're just an intern. How come you ran into a nuclear crisis as soon as you went out? Fury, don't yell at me. I want to know why more than you do. I thought SHIELD was a just organization that maintains world peace, but I never thought it was a gathering place for a group of idiots. Woo, calm down, girl. Only the elite who pass the assessment will be selected to join SHIELD, and you know that. Now tell me calmly what happened. Barbara quickly recounted the cause and effect of the incident, and at the same time stated her doubts. The person on the other end of the phone listened quietly. Finally, he asked, you mean, Agent Gordon gave you the order to shoot Henry Brown? The Henry Brown we know, yes. Barbara answered simply, her attention completely focused on Fury's response. If the other party was going to lie, to deceive her, this was the perfect time to turn things around. Okay, girl, I'm going to tell you something incredible. It hasn't been reported yet, and there's no declassification authority, but it's definitely confidential information that can't be widely circulated. You better watch your mouth. Go ahead. You know I know my limits, otherwise I wouldn't be involved in the professor's research project. In high school, Barbara Morse was part of biology professor Wilma Calvin's research team. It was a government-funded team developing super soldier serum. Because it was a government project, of course, not everyone could join. In addition to meeting the required skills, they also had to pass a loyalty assessment. Don't think that the American Empire, which advocates for freedom, doesn't have such a system. Their core elite is not something that just anyone can join. However, this experience was like the best proof for Barbara. Nick Fury had just said on the phone, I met aliens today. They can change their appearance at will, becoming anyone you know, He was pretending to be Phil in front of me, and I couldn't recognize him at all. Until the real Phil called me. If what you said is true, then Gordon might have been replaced, so what should we do? Report it to Commander Kohler. Not yet. Why? Barbara questioned. Fury on the phone said, let's put it this way, because I can't guarantee you're the real deal. I'm not so lucky. There's another Barbara Morse around. The same goes for Kohler, so what are you going to do? After a moment's thought, Fury seemed to have made up his mind and said seriously, listen, Bobby. I'm going to track down a key figure. According to the report, he's suspected to be at an internet cafe. Let's meet there and talk, okay, but, just what? Tell me, Fury said impatiently. I have a companion here. Who? Henry Brown? Hen. Are you sure? Fury asked incredulously. And his tiger, Barbara added. Henry, standing by, corrected him. It's a tabby cat, not a tiger. There was a long silence on the line before he finally said, forget it, let him come along. If Gordon is replaced by aliens, besides being curious about why he's being targeted, the enemy of my enemy can also become an ally. Fury then recited a series of addresses. Barbara relayed them and asked, Henry, do you know where they are? Henry nodded. Barbara said into the phone, I know. We'll meet you there, Fury. Well, be careful, Fury said, hanging up. Retracting the antenna of her mobile phone, Barbara relayed what she could to Henry. Even though the Kryptonian, with his super hearing, had heard every detail of the previous conversation, Barbara asked, do you think this Fury is trustworthy? He's someone you know, and I don't. So, whether he's trustworthy or not is up to you to decide. Henry didn't blindly make predictions about the film's plot, but instead left the final word to Barbara. He was thinking, the Fury on the other end of the line must be Nick Fury. The future director of SHIELD. Could it be the white, one-eyed man he had seen? Chapter 348, First Meeting with Fury. Henry, nice to meet you. I'm Nicholas Joseph Fury. Just call me Fury, that's what my friends all call me. Actually, I was hoping to meet you under more appropriate circumstances, not under these circumstances. Standing on the street, introduced by Barbara Morse, was Fury, a tall, handsome black man with a sharp, sculpted look. Middle-aged, with a buzz cut in the style of an African American. His shrewdness and witty remarks were instantly appealing, if one didn't know about the tangled web of relationships behind him. Henry, meeting her for the first time, didn't express any obvious likes or dislikes. Instead, he extended his hand to accept the handshake, then looked at Barbara Morse with an expression of complete innocence. Even more ambiguous than Barbara's roles as a schoolboy and a social figure, Nick Fury had fought in Vietnam, served as a spy during the Cold War, and ultimately joined SHIELD as an agent. He possessed a wealth of experience in socializing. This black Nick Fury confessed, it was my idea to let Bobby contact you. I've wanted to contact you for a long time, but I didn't expect some misunderstandings to arise. We had good intentions, until I found a better opportunity. I didn't want the misunderstanding between us to worsen, so I put my plans to contact you on hold. I didn't expect you to become a target of those aliens. Do you have any idea why? Was this an excuse for Barbara Morse's previous behavior? Admittedly, it was a plausible excuse. At least Barbara hadn't shown any malice when she contacted Henry. She had simply concealed something. Under such circumstances, Henry certainly wouldn't have called for a fight the moment they met. He simply pretended to be unaware of the unnecessary details and answered Nick Fury's questions. I can't think of any reason for being targeted. That's why I want to find the answer. Otherwise, I would have already begun to resolve the problem. Indeed, with a man before him, the thought of recruiting him flashed through his mind. Nick Fury was well aware of his current identity, the CEO of Stark Films. While not from Stark Industries, the salary of a CEO was something he couldn't afford personally. What could he possibly offer to recruit him? He was already quite courageous by not resorting to sycophancy or financial support. The ideal approach to dealing with such a person was to stimulate their patriotism and adopt a patriotic approach, rather than resorting to vulgar talk of money or self-interest, which was quite effective for some young people still harboring ideals. However, Barbara had tried this tactic before and was certain it wouldn't work. He wasn't someone who could be moved by ideals or money. The success of Tony Stark's recruitment, judging by the intelligence they had gathered, was more a result of a competition of genius, or perhaps even a resonance. The digitalization of film, which was subtly disrupting Hollywood's peace, was the work of this young man. If any university student were to make such a claim, they would likely be dismissed as some Silicon Valley upstart. 9 out of 10 would fail, while the remaining 1 would soar to fame. But backed by Stark Industries, claiming to digitize film production, this carries a completely different weight. The shadow cast by Howard Stark has not yet been shed by the old men who have experienced it. However, in the eyes of outsiders, this young man is just a puppet of Tony Stark. Not many people believe that he is really the leader. It was this mutual admiration between geniuses that made Nick Fury miss this genius he had long been eyeing and fall into Stark's control. All of the above are Nick Fury's inferences. If Henry knew, not only would he refute each point, but most of them would be sneered at. However, this did not prevent Nick Fury from treating the CEO of Stark Films, a young man much younger than him who was inexplicably involved, with a more equal attitude. Nick Fury said, "Although I regret to say this, I believe that SHIELD's actions against you are because aliens have infiltrated our organization. I've witnessed his ability to transform into familiar people myself, and I couldn't tell the difference. The key figure I'm looking for now is the woman who's clashing with these aliens. While we can't confirm whether she's friend or foe, she definitely has information about them. I know your special abilities, so perhaps we could work together for now. At the very least, we need to find a way to identify those individuals and resolve our shared problem. Generally speaking, to maintain their authority, those within an organization are wary of revealing their weaknesses. After all, maintaining the organization's prestige allows them to manipulate the situation. At the very least, they shouldn't do so in front of outsiders. They can handle the situation internally. But for a man who'd risen to the position of CEO of Stark Films, and from the very beginning, Nick Fury had only intended to recruit him as a peripheral, personal subordinate, SHIELD's prestige was irrelevant. Cultivating his own goodwill was more important. Besides, this man hated being kept in the dark. Which was why Nick Fury spoke the truth without hesitation. To Henry, he truly was a seasoned veteran worthy of being the king of agents. His actions and words were incredibly comforting. He had accurately identified his niche, seeking a win-win outcome rather than demanding unwarranted effort. Unlike his own interactions with the X-Men, that had been like pouring boiling oil over cold water, the outcome was as disastrous as it could be. However, this was also due to the fact that their first encounter wasn't a friendly one, leaving a negative impression. If this person weren't Nick Fury, if he weren't backed by SHIELD, this first encounter would have been a chance encounter. Of course, it wasn't impossible that this was all a carefully crafted atmosphere to create misunderstandings. Whatever the true reason, this Black Nick Fury was right. He'd been inexplicably hated by the Skrulls, and he needed to address it. Following his actions was likely the easiest way to do it. So Henry said, "Fury, I agree with you." "So, briefly, what leads do you have?" Nick Fury said. "While I don't know if it's true or not, the target woman claims to be a member of the Kree Star Troopers. She stole a motorcycle and an outfit from the clothing store next door. She appears here primarily to use the internet cafe to research. I asked the administrator and checked her browsing history, and I found she was searching for Pancho's bar. I think that's where we're going. Do you know where it's located?" Henry asked. His knowledge was limited to businesses within downtown Los Angeles and airports in various states. Bars outside of Los Angeles were out of reach. Glancing at the car Henry was driving, which looked different from the one listed, Nick Fury said, "I know the location. But your car isn't quite the official one, is it? Would you like to come with me in my car?" Henry smiled and said, "Is your car big enough for my kitten?" At that moment, lying in the back seat of the stolen old car, Katie raised her tiger head and roared. "Okay, good kitty. You can drive that car and follow me. If we head out to the suburbs, we're entering state police jurisdiction, and their response isn't as quick." Chapter 349 Pancho Bar. Pancho's bar was very similar to Old John's, the bar Henry had once visited in Alaska. It had a typical small-town bar atmosphere, providing a place for nearby residents to socialize in the evening. There were no strange rice-sharing, harem-like affairs, or gang-related incidents. A pool table and a jukebox were standard bar fixtures. More unusually, there was a Street Fighter II arcade machine. Although it was released in 1991, given American slow adoption of Japanese entertainment, this coincided with the rise of Street Fighter II in the US. The presence of an arcade machine in a small-town bar also suggests a younger clientele. If Old John's Bar were in Alaska, Few older folks would even bother playing the pinball machine. Inside, the walls, except for one decorated with a beautiful neon sign, were covered in photos submitted by customers. These included landscapes, photos of the owner and patrons on outings, and even pictures of military weaponry. The latter type, in particular, suggests the owner might be a redneck or someone with similar tendencies. At least they were anti-war hippies, otherwise they wouldn't have hung pictures of weapons. This stance wasn't difficult to understand. The victory in the Persian Gulf War in the early 1990s had made Americans feel more powerful than ever. An obsession with or even worship of military weaponry was commonplace. The underlying reason for the hippie opposition to the war was the decade-long quagmire of the Vietnam War, which had cost countless young Americans their lives and dampened their morale. Fearing forced conscription, the remaining young men naturally vehemently opposed it. It's like the common morale theory: when the tide is in their favor, everyone fights like a wolf; when the tide is against them, everyone flees like a rat. "What can I do for you?" The bar owner emerged from the lounge. Nick Fury glanced around and asked, "Was there a woman in your bar today?" "About 5'7", with shoulder-length blonde hair. She speaks strangely, saying things like Kree and Star Troopers." "No such person, sir," the bar owner replied honestly. "Looks like we're almost there," Nick Fury surmised. He turned to the other two and said, "Bobby, please, you and Henry, please wait in the car outside. I'll take care of this, I can stay too." Before Barbara could finish her sentence, Henry said, "Okay, I'll go back to the car and take care of Katie. If anything happens, as long as you're not killed right away, I should be able to help in time." "Oh, that's a reassuring statement," Black Nick Fury quipped. But Henry didn't say anything back. Instead, he turned and walked out. Barbara Morse, who was left standing, looked around, somewhat bewildered. It was only Nick Fury's wave that convinced the girl to follow him out. Barbara didn't get in Fury's car as before, but got into Henry's. The bold man was in the driver's seat, stroking the tiger's head that stretched from the back seat to the front. Katie squinted her eyes in pleasure, stretching her neck to enjoy it. Barbara, who was sitting in the passenger seat, said a little angrily, "Why don't you stay inside? If a conflict occurs, will we be able to provide support in time?" A little knowledge of psychology: the party with more people is likely to bring a sense of oppression to the party with fewer people. This is not conducive to negotiations. Fury feels that he has a way to talk to the other party instead of causing conflict. So he doesn't want to exert too much pressure. Is that so? Otherwise, why do you think I came out? Am I afraid of conflict? Henry smiled. You ran away when the SHIELD strike team arrived. What else could I have done if I hadn't? It was clearly a trap. Should I fight back or just let myself be captured? Oh, they had a kill order. So I should have stayed where I was and let them use up their ammunition before giving up and going home. Aggrieved Barbara pouted. That's not what I meant. I'm not blaming you, Bobby. It's just that when you choose to cooperate, you should give your partner time and space to complete their tasks. Instead of taking on everything yourself or getting involved because you're worried about others messing up. But Barbara was about to speak, but Henry pressed a finger to her mouth, then held it to his own lips. SHH, someone's coming. Quiet. Barbara, listening intently, heard the heavy exhaust roar of what sounded like a motorcycle engine approaching from a distance. The old car they were riding in was separated from the bar entrance by Fury's car, so there was no need to worry about being seen. Unless the woman got out and carefully checked the surroundings. A motorcycle pulled up and stopped in front of the bar. Henry and Barbara both spotted the woman on the scooter, who looked just like Nick Fury had described. But her outfit was a bit pretentious. The leather jacket and jeans were casual enough, and the t-shirt underneath was a plain one. But with a shirt wrapped around her waist, she looked like a teenager deliberately trying to be rebellious. Her face certainly didn't resemble Brie Larson's. While she also had a prominent jawline, it wasn't square. Her features weren't those of a delicate, pitiful woman, but rather possessed a certain air of heroism, like those of a woman of exceptional ability and confidence. However, a dissonant, shadowy quality shone through her dashing demeanor. Her own foggy past had revealed a glimpse of her on this backward planet. She had no idea what she would uncover if she continued her investigation. However, judging by the fact that she hadn't done much research since stopping the bike, simply looking around casually before entering the bar, it seemed she was being rather casual. Warrior type, straightforward, and easily deceived. That's the impression Henry got from the few glances he got. He didn't even need to recall his memories before the time travel to figure out what this Captain Marvel was like. It would have been nice if it was the original Ms. Marvel from the comics, but now it seems that she's closer to the movie version. Barbara huddled in the passenger seat, only sitting up straight after she saw the target enter the bar. Are you going to eavesdrop on their conversation? Or watch from the window? Henry was speechless. If someone's standing by the window, constantly looking in, they probably aren't very smart. Do you really need to warn them? Okay, I won't go. Barbara puffed her cheeks, pouted, and sat hunched in dissatisfaction, as if in a rage. In reality, Henry had already been using a super hearing to monitor the goings-on in the bar. Chapter 350 Fury's Suspicion. There are many types of excellent agents, and Nick Fury during this period was a very approachable and captivating demagogue. This isn't meant as a derogatory term, but rather as a compliment to his exceptional social skills. Few people, no matter who they were, took offense at him at first sight. Unless they were inherently racist and disliked black people. Although a commotion erupted from the bar, tempting Barbara to charge inside, Henry calmed her down, and the two of them quietly crept to the window to peer inside. The noise wasn't a sign of a breakdown between Nick Fury and the man in question. It was that the neon sign inside the bar had been shattered for unknown reasons. The target had his back to the window, so the two peepers happened to meet Nick Fury's eye. There was no communication between the two men inside and outside the window, and Fury ignored it, continuing his conversation with the woman across the street as usual. Seeing this, and without a confrontation, the two men tactfully retreated. Once they were in the blind spot of the window, Barbara whispered, "What was that?" "That Kree Star Trooper's weapon." Henry tilted his head, bewildered, and didn't answer directly. But the photon blast had actually shocked even this Kryptonian. The only external energy attacks he'd seen, besides his own heat ray, were Cyclops' eye blasts from the X-Men. While clearly classified as energy attacks, they all carried kinetic energy and could send people flying. This completely defied the laws of physics, leaving physicists baffled. But Captain Marvel's photon blast was even more extraordinary. It was like a near-physical battering ram, destroying everything with immense kinetic energy. The incinerating heat was merely a byproduct. Furthermore, in Henry's supervision, when the person inside activated her power, she looked like a high-energy luminous object, dazzling and difficult for him to look at directly. However, this energy, which should have been concentrated entirely in the arm of the launcher, was dissipated during the process. It was obvious that her abilities were limited, or perhaps she herself wasn't yet able to fully utilize them. The Kree must be playing a trick on her, Henry speculated, following his memory of the movie. And in reality, Henry indeed saw a strange, unidentified device on the back of her neck. Should he help her break the seal? Or continue to stand by and watch? The troubled Kryptonian was trying to figure out how to profit from this, or perhaps simply increase her favorability. He certainly wouldn't tell her directly that the thing on the back of her neck was a Kree restrictor. Then, a notification popped up saying plus 100 favorability. "They're coming out," Barbara reminded Henry, who was pondering. Nick Fury, exiting the bar, waved to the two. "These are our companions, Agent Moore and Agent Brown," he said. Nick Fury introduced them. "This is Fuss, a Kree interstellar soldier, here to track down our common enemy, the Skrulls. We're heading to the Air Force Base where the Pegasus project is located, but that is a confidential unit, so Bobby, Henry, you two will stay outside the base's backup. Only Voss and I will enter the base." "No problem," Henry, who was in the back, answered directly. The reason why Henry didn't come forward to say hello was that the self-proclaimed noble and great Kree warrior looked down on him and Barbara's fresh out of school, immature look. He didn't say a word the whole time, and was only introduced by Fury. With a nod, they knew each other. Henry, who had no intention of making friends, certainly wouldn't go to someone cold. After agreeing to the arrangement, he returned to his car. Looking at Barbara, who was a little overwhelmed, Nick Fury said, "Bobby, you take Henry's car. I'll take Voss, and we'll go directly into the base when the time comes." "Yes, sir." 4 people, 2 cars, set off immediately. The reason Nick Fury had arrived at Pancho's bar a step behind Fury earlier, but arrived before her, was his familiarity with the route. This time, they were headed to the Pegasus Project's air base, and Nick Fury knew the route perfectly. The car drove straight off without stopping, detoring, or turning back. Fury, following his memory, had gone to Pancho's bar to search for clues about the Pegasus project. It was precisely because of its proximity to the project's air base that pilots occasionally frequented it for drinks, merrymaking, and commemorative photos. They hadn't driven far when, passing a hill, the car ahead of them slowed to the side with its double yellow lights flashing. Henry stepped on the accelerator and parked side by side with Fury's car. Rolling down his window, Nick Fury called out, "The airbase is just ahead. Henry, you and Bobby stop here and provide support at any time. Bobby, do you have a two-way pager?" Barbara, in the passenger seat, pulled something out of her bosom. "Is this it?" "It was issued by the Bureau, because this thing has a very special purpose and no tracking function. Even after being shot by his own people, he didn't think of throwing it away." "Yes. Cell phones can't be used here because there is no signal. The pagers issued by the Bureau follow a special route and can still be used. If there's any problem, I will contact you using the pager." "Okay, sir." After giving the instructions, Nick Fury drove away. Henry followed his instructions and moved the car behind a hill to hide. As the two drove away, Fury asked in surprise, "That car just now, there was a tiger in the back seat." Nick Fury laughed and said, "Its owner insisted that it was a tabby cat named Kitty." "Tabby cat? Are all cats on your planet that big?" "I have a question." "On your planet, Kree." Fury interrupted Nick Fury and corrected him, "There is no planet, Kree. Our home planet is called Hala, and the main ethnic group is the Kree." "Okay. Then let me ask again, are there tigers or tiger-like creatures on your home planet, Hara, or on other planets you have conquered?" "No." "Why do you ask?" "Very good. Then why did you recognize that it was a tiger, eh?" Forth was speechless for a moment, unable to respond. He, Kree, right. Although he had seen the shape-shifting Skrulls, creatures not native to Earth, the woman calling herself Fury looked just like a human. Therefore, Nick Fury didn't believe she was the Kree she claimed to be. Partly because he knew from the photographs his father, White Nick Fury, had captured the Kree from Earth. They were an alien race with blue skin and blue blood. This led him to question Fury's actions and find some inconsistency in her words. What Nick Fury didn't know was that pure-blooded Kree did have blue skin and blue blood. However, to foster their own survival, the Kree bred with genetically compatible humanoids, resulting in the pink-skinned Kree. The pink-skinned Kree still had blue blood and a unique structure in their DNA, an involuntary evolutionary lock. These two traits ensured their inclusion within the mainstream Kree race. This was also why Fury never doubted her Kree identity on Hala. Many Kree, including her commander, Yon Rog, shared a similar pink complexion. In comparison, pure-blooded blue-skinned Kree are relatively rare today, accounting for less than 10% of the majority ethnic group. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.